now. So we're going to go ahead and jump to it. If you guys saw the agenda, first up is going to be the Department of Ag and Natural Resources, and they're going to discuss some changes to regulation and just kind of advise you on some new regulations. And without further ado, Katie or Valerie, I don't know who's up, but I will toss the mic over to you.
Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you. And this is Katie, everybody, not Valerie. So
And let me get this started here. Perfect. All right, as Steven said, I am Katie with the South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources, and I'm going to go over the first part, and then I'm going to hand it off to Val for the second part. So initially, what is a private applicator? This is the legal description, if you would like to read that. But a private applicator license allows you to apply general use pesticides or restricted use pesticides on your own land, on your employer's land, or on neighbors' private ag land without compensation. The question for everyone today, are supervised applications allowed in South Dakota? And that is a no. Supervision is not allowed. You must have your own license when applying pesticides in South Dakota. And then another update, a minimum age requirement for obtaining a commercial or private applicator license is now 18 years of age or older. Now we're going to go over some private applicator endorsements. Certain types of pesticide applications need extra endorsements and/or additional training before your private applicator license is fully legal. There are 3 additional endorsements that you may need to add to your license. You can see they're highlighted down here on the bottom of the screen. Aerial, M44, or non-soil fumigation. So who would need the aerial endorsement? Any private applicators making any type of aerial pesticide application to their own land, and this includes any drone or fixed wing applications. How do you get the aerial endorsement? You will set up an appointment at one of our testing locations and take the aerial exam, or category 17. Once you pass that, it'll be added onto your license. Who needs the M44 endorsement? Any private applicator that will be using the M44 device on their own land. How do you get it? You will call the Department of Ag to be put on the list for the specific training needed in use of the M44 device. And then, as always, you can call our phone at 605-773-4432. And lastly, this is a new one here recently. Who needs the non-soil fumigation endorsement? That's any private applicator applying, purchasing, and handling non-soil fumigations. So that would be any of your fumitoxins or phostoxin pellets and tablets. Another, who needs it? This applies to any grain bin fumigations as well as those prairie dog fumigation. How do you get this endorsement on your license? You will set up an appointment at a testing location. This can only be done in person, and you will go take the non-soil fumigation exam, or the category 14 exam. We have plenty of testing sites. We'll put this link in the chat too. Plenty of county testing sites and then SDSU regional testing sites as well. So there are plenty of options for you to go in person and get those exams done if needed. And just as a reminder, remember anyone applying any type of fumigants must fill out the fumigation management plan. We do have an example on our website that you can find there with that QR code. We'll put a link to that in the chat as well. Okay, now we're on to a couple chemicals that are not endorsements, but they do require extra training by the applicator, and that's going to be any paraquat products, and possibly, if EPA approves them, any over-the-top dicamba products. So how do you get paraquat training? You can go online and just Google search paraquat training. Syngenta has an EPA-approved paraquat training for free that is found at the website on the screen. But if you Google it, it should be one that just pops up right away. Once you do this training, you keep a copy of the certificate of completion for your records. You do not need to send that into the Department of Ag. You just need it for proof for yourself. And then if over-the-top dicamba products are approved for use on soybeans in South Dakota for the 2026 growing season, training may be required. Again, how do you get that? You can just go online and search dicamba training. There are 3 different options typically that we've had in the past that you can choose from. It does not matter which one you do. But for right now, we're still at a standstill of knowing if we can even apply these products. So it'll be online when you search it. If you end up doing this training, keep a copy of your certificate of completion for your records. You do not need to send this in to the Department of Ag. And that is all I have for you today, and I'm going to pass it off to Valerie.
Okay, and I'm just going to delve into some laws and regulations with a little bit of a spotlight on record keeping requirements. So why do we even need to keep records in the first place? It is because it is not only a federal law in the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, there's also state law specifically for what is required in South Dakota. A lot of private applicators say, why do I have to keep records of applications I'm making to my own land? And the answer to that is your farm and ranch is not like Las Vegas. So what stays in Vegas, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, but what is going on, what you're producing on your ranch does not stay on your farm and ranch. It is going out into the public. And when you're applying chemicals to those particular products, that they need to have records kept on what was applied. Also, it is your best line of defense if there is a complaint and somewhere around you, when an inspector goes in to look at the records of the people that the complaint was against, they also pull the records from all of the neighboring applicators as well. So if your records show that you're following the label, and that's going to be a good line of defense for you. And that's much better than not having any records at all, because that's a pretty telltale sign that perhaps the label wasn't followed. The other reason is that it's just a good management, a good way of writing down, keeping track of your applications. There is no specific form that you have to use, but we do have a sample form that I'll show you here in a moment. Besides keeping your application records required by law, it's a great place to write down how effective that application was, and you can look back in the past year or so and hopefully make some decisions of timing or products used, and make some decisions for future years depending on how well it worked. So who needs to keep records? In South Dakota, both commercial and private applicators are required to keep records on all pesticide applications. At the federal level, it only requires that you keep records of restricted use pesticides, but South Dakota law says that every application you make, that you need to keep a record. And just so that we're on the same page, when I use the term pesticide, that is an umbrella term for all the different types of pesticides that there are. If you tell me you're using a pesticide, I have no idea if you're using a herbicide to control weeds or a rodenticide to control rodents. That's just a very umbrella term, and a lot of people don't even understand, pesticide. They might understand the word chemical, but pesticides obviously can be chemicals, or they can be baits or different types of pest control products. Again, record keeping in South Dakota is required for any application you make, whether it's a general use pesticide, which is a pesticide that anyone can purchase, and homeowners that aren't producing $1,000 worth of an ag product don't have to have a pesticide applicator license, a private license to apply on their own land. But farmers and ranchers applying to ag land that produces can potentially produce $1,000 or more of ag product. That is a requirement. Even though you can purchase general use, anyone can purchase it to apply it on a farm and ranch. It does require that you have a private applicator license. Of course, restricted use pesticides, you'll be able to tell right away. That's the very first thing on the front of the label is a restricted use pesticide box. Legally, those can only be purchased by someone who has a private or commercial pesticide applicator license, and can only legally be used by someone with an applicator license. The third type of pesticide is the 25B exempt. It's a newer classification. EPA calls them minimum risk, and they don't register them through the EPA like the other two types are registered through the Environmental Protection Agency. 25B exempt are not. However, South Dakota and several other states do require these minimum risk pesticides to be registered through the state, and therefore they are, if you do use any of those, you do need to keep records on their application. So we're just going to look at the 11 items required by South Dakota Administrative Rule. They are in, like I said, written in administrative rule, and we do have a sample form that was created to follow along exactly with those 11 items. You do not have to use this form. You can keep these 11 items in any manner you want on paper. You can use, there's different apps that are available. Wherever you want to keep it, as long as you're able to, if you were to be audited or if you were to be a part of an investigation, that you are able to produce the records that pertain to the investigation. Again, if you just, the QRL code will take you there, or if in your whatever web browser you use, if you just type in South Dakota pesticide record keeping, it'll pull up this sample form that you can print out. I think you can even fill it in online. And again, you do not have to use this specific form. It just happens to be set up to follow the rules as they're written in South Dakota Administrative Rule. So we're going to go through a quick example of record keeping, and this is going to be a prairie dog control record keeping example, but all of the 11 items are going to talk about are going to pertain to any application that is made, regardless if it's a rodenticide or a herbicide. It's all going to be the same. Just as a note, there's a lot of different ways to control or to manage prairie dogs on South Dakota land. There's a lot of places where we actually have people that have a commercial category 9 public health and that go in and dust prairie dogs with insecticides to kill fleas to control the plague. So we have land where they're managing their pesticide applications to keep the prairie dogs healthy, but we also have options where people are wanting to use their grass, harvest it through cattle or different means other than having prairie dogs there. So in our example today, we're going to talk about controlling prairie dogs on a tract of land. And there are, of course, a lot of different products that can be used, kaput or Rosol, although those two are not allowed for use in what EPA terms Indian country, so tribal land. Kaput and Rosol are not, cannot be used, but the other product is zinc phosphide oats. That can be used across South Dakota as an option. In this example, we're going to look at using zinc phosphide oats bait to control prairie dogs. And so that is going to be the product that we're using in this example. And the Department of Ag and Natural Resources actually manufactures this bait. And so this is our pesticide product label. And so I'll be pulling information right from that label in this example. As a note, the label does say under use restrictions that this is for control of either black-tailed prairie dogs or white-tailed prairie dogs. And so in this case, in South Dakota, about black-tailed prairie dogs is what we're controlling. This is manufactured for use in not only South Dakota, but a few other states. The other use restriction is that this product, this prairie dog bait, can only be used during July of one year through the end of February the next. So that is the time of application, and only one application during that time period, unless you have prairie dogs moving in from neighboring lands after you've done the application. The other use restriction is that this product can only be applied to rangeland that has less than 50% ground cover. And that is just so that this product will work, because if there's too much ground cover, the prairie dogs are going to eat that instead of the zinc phosphide prairie dog bait. So in this example, you can see here we've outlined this area of land, and you can see in this example, hopefully you can see that it is less than 50% ground cover. It's pretty bare where this particular prairie dog town is. Again, this is the form. We're just going to go through these 11 items and what is expected from applicators to write down for each of the items. So item 1 is the person for whom the pesticide was applied. And so for most private applicators, this is going to be your name and mailing address that you're writing down here, because you're applying to your own land. However, if you were to share ag services with an ag neighbor, you would write their name down and their mailing address if that's who you're applying for. Item 2 is location of where the product was applied. And this has to be specific so that someone coming in that doesn't know the area can find the location. So you have to use either GPS coordinates or legal land description. Can't use Bob's North 40 because not everyone is going to know where that's at. So we need specific location of where the product was applied. Item 3 is the pests that are being targeted, and this comes specifically from the label. So on our label, again, it's to control black-tailed prairie dogs and white-tailed prairie dogs, and in this scenario, we're controlling black-tailed prairie dogs. Okay, and you'll notice this is, of course, a restricted use pesticide, as most of the products for controlling prairie dogs are. The size of the area being treated is item 4, and so whatever that might be, whether it's acres or number of animals you're applying ear tags to, or how many bushels of, let's say, seed protection product you're applying to a certain number of bushels of seed, whatever the situation is. So in this particular scenario, it comes out to about 100 acres. And so that is what we're going to put down for the size of area being treated, is 100 acres. Item 5 is date and time of application. So this is specifically the year, month, and date, as well as the start and finish time. So in this particular example, the date of application was January 30th, 2024. Got started about 10 a.m., finished by 3. And as a note, you do actually, this is a good time period for this particular product, because you do want the sun to be out. You do want not to have an overcast type of a day or get started too early or finish too late. Item 6 is the applicator who is applying the pesticides. And so you put the name and then your applicator license number. If you're a private applicator, your license number starts with a 9. It's a 7-digit number starting with a 9. Commercial applicators, their record, their barcode ID is a 7-digit number starting with 1, but they are issued a specific applicator license number. So in this case, I'm a test applying for herself. She's using, her private applicator license number, or she can use her commercial license and keep that track of that. If there's more than one person making the application, as Katie mentioned, each person applying the product has to have their own applicator license. And so you could record all of the applicators on this one sheet, or each person can do their own sheet. That's up to you. Item 7 is the actual product, the pesticide product being applied. And so trade name, common name, EPA registration number. As a note, in this particular product, pre-baiting is mandatory as written on the label. And this is because if you are not going to pre-bait with regular oats, untreated oats, don't even use this product because they are not going to eat it. They need to have a pre-bait of untreated oats so that they get used to eating the regular oats. And once it's consumed, then you can put out treated oats. But I wanted to put this in here because I would note it on in my record keeping. Even though it's not required by law, I would note when I put the untreated oats out, and also a note of when that untreated oats were consumed, so I knew when to put out the actual pesticide product. Okay. The trade name is what the brand name is, and so on our label, the brand is zinc phosphide prairie dog bait. The common name, which is another item you need to keep, is what the active ingredient is. So in this case, the active ingredient right from the label is zinc phosphide. And then the EPA registration number, which is probably the most accurate way of writing down what the product is that you're using. It comes also right from the pesticide label. It says the EPA registration number, and that's what you will write down. Item 8 is the company name of who manufactures the product. In this case, South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources is who manufactures this product. Item 9 is the weather during application, and you can use information from your phone. National Weather Service, SDSU Mesonet is a great source. Those are actually the two sources of weather that the Department of Ag and Natural Resources will look at if there's an investigation, to make sure that what they see at those sites is matching up to what the applicator has written down. The things that you need to keep track of are the air temperature and the wind direction, which way the wind is coming from, as well as the wind speed. So again, the climate.sdstate.edu is where the Mesonet weather information is from, and there's getting more and more locations across the state. So it really makes it nice. And they have an applicator page where you can actually just have the weather information emailed to you. And that's a great way of recording what the information was for the station closest to where you're at. In this particular case, the air temperature was 19 degrees. The wind direction was from the northwest, and a beautiful 10 miles per hour, always needed for less than that for a good application. Although this label doesn't mention wind speed requirements, but obviously you want it to be not blowing your poisoned oats around. You can also use wind direction as far as a degree. So north is considered 360 degrees, and then you can use the degrees around for wind direction. This is what the National Weather Service uses. Also, a good option is your handheld wind meters. Want to keep it at about 4 or 5, 6 feet above ground is where you want to take your wind measurement from. Take a picture of what you're recording for wind and gusts just take a picture with your phone, and that's a great way to record your action. Item 10 is the amount and concentration. So this is kind of where sometimes people wonder what they need to keep. But basically, total pesticide applied is what we're asking for here. In this case, we applied a 50-pound bag of poisoned oats. A 50-pound bag, depending on how many holes that you have, how many prairie dog holes there are out there, a 50-pound bag will roughly do 100 acres. If there's some more intense mounds, you're going to need more, but that's just a kind of a guideline. And the active ingredient per unit that you're putting out then is 1 teaspoon per mound. So that comes right from the label of how much you're putting out, how much active ingredient per unit, whether it's per mound, per acre, however you want to record it. From this label, we use a teaspoon per mound, which comes out to about 50 pounds per 100 acres. Okay, item 11 is the crop or commodity or site that's being treated. And again, this comes right from the label. On the label, it says this is for use in rangeland. And so that is what, or pasture land, and that is what we wrote down here in our records. Okay, some additional notes that pertain to this particular example. And I know that this is a kind of a crop emphasis, but just want to note a couple things. If you see black-footed ferret activity in a prairie dog town, then an application of a pesticide is a no-go. So black-footed ferrets, you'll see this is a photo right from South Dakota. This is out down on tribal land. This little trench that the black-footed ferret will make right up to the prairie dog mound is an indication that you have looked at black-footed ferret in that prairie dog town. Okay. Also a note, and this does apply to anyone applying a restricted use pesticide in what EPA terms Indian country. And so if you are applying a restricted use pesticide on tribal land or reservation, besides your state applicator license, you apply for a federal certificate with the Environmental Protection Agency. And this is the form number, that 8500-17. You fill in that form, send in a copy of your state applicator license, and this goes into Denver. That's our regional office, and it'll have the address on the form, or you can email it in. You need to apply for this if, again, you're applying restricted use pesticides in Indian country. And that will be valid for as long as your state license is valid. The other note about record keeping is that besides those 11 items that South Dakota requires, there may be specific label requirements. Like Katie was mentioning, we may get over the top dicamba products registered for use again in 2026. We're still waiting to hear. But if we do, those have always in the past and will likely in the future require that you have annual training to apply them. And you, as Katie mentioned, those would get, that certificate of completion would get printed and put in with along with your other record keeping items. Just as a note, this dicamba, over the top dicamba, does not include lower rates of dicamba that people use in pasture and that type of thing. That's a different, those are different products. So this is specifically for over the top products used for soybeans. Katie mentioned that before you do, if you're going to control prairie dogs or if you can control any pest inside in like a grain bin, and you're going to use a fumigant like aluminum phosphide, which is phostoxin would be an example of a brand name. You do have to complete a fumigation plan ahead of time. And as a private applicator, you would have to add the non-soil fumigation endorsement onto your regular private applicator license. Okay. And you do that by testing. You have to, this training doesn't add that on to your license. It's a specific exam you have to take and then keep it up every 3 years, just like your license. Other rules that pertain to record keeping are that you need to have your records completed by the end of the day, so that if the Department of Ag were to call on you for a copy of the records, that you'd be able to provide them by the end of the day, or by the next business day. Records in South Dakota are required to be kept for 3 years, and that is because we have products that have 18 to 24 month carryovers. So in South Dakota, we require 3 years. At the federal level, it'll say 2, and if you go online, you'll see that. But in South Dakota, records are kept for 3 years. Some final notes, and I always like to make sure that everyone is aware of this. The Department of Ag and Natural Resources does have not only a pesticide container collection program, but they also have, and that runs through the summer. And so if you rinse and drain your pesticide containers, you can recycle them at no fee through the Department of Ag and Natural Resources collection that they run across the state through the summer. The waste pesticide program is a wonderful program, and this is available to anyone in South Dakota, not just private and commercial applicators. This is a program available to anyone that inherits an old shed with a whole bunch of old product. As an example, you can call the Department of Ag. This is the number specifically for collection programs, 773-3153. And they'll set up an appointment to pick up products that are no longer labeled for use in South Dakota, products that you can't even tell what they are anymore, or they're not usable. They've separated out. They're not even usable. These products can all be collected. There's no fee to the person to collect these products. They get incinerated, and then that way they are not going into our water or into to the ground. And it's an excellent program, again, for anyone in South Dakota that needs to utilize this. Always like to just remind everyone too at the end of this that if there's one thing, even if the label doesn't necessarily mention it, just always wear the appropriate gloves. If you're using a fumigant, and you'll find this out on if you have to take that exam, the non-soil fumigation exam, you would wear actually cloth gloves for fumigants because you don't want your hands to get sweaty and start the moisture activates the fumigant, so you don't want that. But most other chemicals, and it'll usually say on the label what type of glove to wear, but most type you want to wear chemical resistant gloves. And always change out of your clothes and launder your clothes separate after you make an application with the pesticide. Even if you're just handling empty jugs, containers, you do want to have gloves on while you're doing that. It just reduces your exposure over the years by a lot. If there are any questions, you can call Katie or I at our office phone number 605-773-4432. You can email us, either Valerie Mitchell or Katie Nold, katie.nold, if you have any questions. But that, I believe, has all that we have on record keeping.
All right. Thank you, Valerie. Does anybody have any questions for Katie or Valerie about any of that information? Katie, Valerie, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have to record all of this every time you are on a four-wheeler spot spraying thistles?
Yes. And you can get that out of the way here. You want to unshare? I can't get to the so you're not going to, like every little spot that you spray, you're going to note that you are doing a spot spray on a certain amount of land, maybe an acre, and you're going to put the location of that field, and you're going to put down that you're spot spraying, but you are going to record how much total product you put on in that area.
Yeah, so just to summarize that, you do need to make records. You need to keep those records every time you make an application. Make sure you're keeping those 11 records. For a land description, you don't need to change that, right? Because that land probably doesn't change. If it changes dramatically and you've got to go in and make a note about it, make sure you change it. But if you go out to Bob's North 40, that again has a legal land description or the GPS coordinates, Bob's North 40 is going to be Bob's North 40 in the next 5 years, probably. So there are some things that you could probably just transfer over. As a note on that, I've taken the Danner, the Department of Ag and Natural Resources, their record keeping page. I've turned it into a notebook. We've got some available. I'm updating things this year. We're going to improve it. I'm going to release it out next year. So keep an eye out for things. I'm going to deliver it to a lot of the county offices so you guys will have close access to it. All right, before we go any further, I've been noticing a lot of you guys, and I appreciate this, putting your name into the chat. If you have not done that already, open up that chat, not for you guys that are watching in person at one of our county office or regional centers, but if you're watching from home, add your name into the chat. If you open the chat, you'll see that Justice Jessup just put his name in there. Do the exact same thing. I just need you to type your name. That helps identify not only the person that's watching and who registered, who signed up, it helps me keep track, and it also helps me to identify any other people that are watching with you. So it's really important that I have that information. Please go ahead and toss that into the chat as things are coming in. I'm going to share my screen. We are close to a break. We'll take a break probably in like 3 minutes. One of the things you'll notice that I did differently this year is we try to focus on the management aspect and regulatory aspect, and I'll squeeze in safety information every possible chance that I get. So you're welcome. I Look, that's my job. My title is pesticide safety educator or pesticide education. My big focus is safety. And so that's really what I'm interested from you guys is for you to make applications that are effective, safe, and legal. Legal's pretty easy, I should think. You just follow the laws that are given to you and you be successful that way. Advocacy is tough. That's why we have the experts here to talk about what works, what doesn't work, when it works, why it doesn't work, those things. Um, and then when we talk about safety, well, we've got to think about some things. So it was really prudent that Valerie talked about gloves before she ended this. I want you guys to recognize that not all gloves are built the same. This goes for all pesticide safety equipment across the board. Um, Not all gloves are the same. So when you see something like, oh, well, that glove will work for me, we can't be sure. So I've got 4 examples here. These are pretty common gloves. Barrier laminate, that's the top of the line stuff. Butyl rubber is pretty good. Nitrile rubbers, okay. Polyethylene, you probably should never use unless you're making a sandwich for somebody and you didn't touch anything else. Importantly, there's this slide. This is from the EPA. They went through and they compared, compatibility essentially. What materials actually function to protect the skin from exposure to certain types of chemicals. And if you look on the left here, the selection category listed on pesticide label, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. That doesn't make any sense. You can see the explanation down at the bottom. What that's telling you is there is a load of things inside pesticide chemicals that they do not have to divulge. Those are proprietary chemicals that make the formulation work. If they were to divulge it, it's a trade secret. And so they're allowed to keep it close to their chest. If you look into some of what those chemicals are, they are in them by themselves, potentially extremely dangerous. And those are the chemicals we typically want to protect ourselves from because they tend to be the carriers or the solvents of the things that are actually doing the killing. And so the EPA has generated this nice little compatibility chart. Here we go. Those are the explanations. Now, if we look at one of the types of gloves, this is that polyethylene. You see it's terrible. Down the line, polyethylene is good for A, that's dry, and water-based formulations. So here we are, explanations on the left. You see A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. These are the explanations of what those are. You've heard me talk about it. Essentially, those are potentially chemicals that don't have to be listed, but are potentially problematic. So when we look down the line, polyethylene gloves offer little support. When we look at nitrile rubber, we get better support across the board, but it's still slight in some of the more dangerous G and H chemicals, which are aromatic petroleum distillates with a higher concentration of 40%. That's very high. Halogenated hydrocarbons, which are also very, very dangerous. Butyl rubber, another step up. You see we get into high, but still slight down at the bottom there. This barrier laminate is as good as it gets. It's high all the way down the line. So when you're choosing those products to protect your skin from exposure, make sure you're doing so correctly. Make sure you recognize that the label will identify exactly what you need to wear, and you can identify not only the type of chemical that is typically the most abundant in that formulation, but you can then choose based on this chart which of those protective gears are most beneficial for you given the product that you're using. Use these things. Make sure you're going through it. Viton, high across the board or most of the way, but not very good for B, which is ketones such as acetone and some other things. So make sure you're choosing your gloves. Make sure you're choosing all PPE appropriately. We don't have much time for a break, but if you guys are interested, you can come back in 2 minutes. We're going to start promptly at 2:15.
I do want to just mention, Stephen, that if someone does get kicked off, from the Zoom meeting, just hop back on. We'll be able to see that you were only off for a couple minutes. But so if you get kicked off, just get right back in the Zoom meeting.
It's very common for that to happen. So if your connection's unstable, you get booted, just follow the same link that you did, just join right back up. I'll be able to track you all the way through all of the drops that you went through. No big deal. All right. Next up, see if I can find the schedule. I know I put it somewhere here. Hopefully you guys are getting all the links that I'm putting into the chat. If you don't, let me know. But everything that's being talked about that we have actual links for, I am showing. Okay. So next up, let's just look at this. Next up, we've got Adam Ehrenhorst. Adam, are you ready to go?
Yep, I am.
All right. So next up, we've got Adam. He's going to talk about crop pests in row crops. And he is our resident expert. He is an associate professor, and he's our SDSU field crop entomologist. And he is excellent. He is named SR Guest 4 because he didn't have his panels. And now he's Adam Ehrenhorst. There you go. And I'll give you guys his contact information. But when it comes to understanding crops and the insect pests that you guys might be experiencing or running into, Adam is the expert. So please listen closely, pay attention, and take down his contact information. Anything comes up, you can reach out to him. Adam, if you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen and get started.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I hope everyone's staying warm with the upcoming very cold weather that we're hearing about. And I'll talk about that just for a minute. But cold weather has a negative impact on the insect populations. But one of the big things is we have a little bit of snow cover now, and that's a really great insulation layer for those insect pests. So to get started, I'm going to talk a little bit about grasshoppers. And, when I first started at SDSU, I was told that my couple people before me always started their talks with grasshoppers and talked about them a lot. And if you knew Ben Kamtak, he's the person I'm talking about. And I think there's a good reason. The longer I've been in South Dakota, the longer I've seen the issues and the more I understand that grasshoppers really are a major problem a lot of years in South Dakota. And so if we think about grasshoppers, it's not just the adults or it's not just the immature nymphs that are causing issues, it's both. And so they have a lot of time out in the season and on crops to cause problems. And if we have a large outbreak, which is pretty common here in South Dakota, they can lead to significant forage loss or they'll feed right on the harvestable part of the plant. And so we get immediate loss and damage. And so just a real big pain. And so I always get asked several times a year, what's the next season going to look like in terms of grasshopper populations? And I wish I had a crystal ball, but unfortunately I don't. So I look at what we saw in the previous year and kind of use that as an idea to get an idea for what's coming in the next season. And so for the last several years, we've had grasshopper populations, and it's not statewide. Sometimes it's one or two areas in the state, sometimes it's more widespread, but definitely have been some hot spots throughout the last few years. And it's not a huge surprise. We've had very favorable falls, and we've had pretty much 5 years in a row and for a lot of the state, favorable conditions, and that's late falls. We haven't had these really early frosts, and that really is beneficial to a grasshopper. In addition, we've had areas of drought. So it's not statewide every year, but we have dry areas, and grasshoppers really take advantage of that because they like bare patches for laying the eggs. So the three species that we typically see in crops the most often are the differential grasshoppers shown here. It's a large grasshopper, the red-legged, which is a pretty small grasshopper, and then the two-striped grasshopper, which is again very large. And the reason we always talk about grasshoppers is, those off years where the populations are growing and the conditions get just right, we can have rapid defoliation and loss in our fields. And so you can see in this picture here off to the left, there's some grass that got sprayed. Apparently it was harboring very large grasshopper populations, and they moved right into the sunflower and then eventually into the soybean too. But if we blow up a picture of one of those sunflower heads, these were two-striped grasshoppers, and at very large numbers. And this was a week. One week the sunflowers looked lovely, and the next week they are gone. And so if we continue through, though, it's not just sunflower. This is from southeast South Dakota. A few years ago, there were large grasshopper populations were actually starting to feed right on the ears that were developing. And so this is a type of injury and damage that we want to avoid because heavy defoliation, depending on the crop, can be tolerated sometimes. But when we start to lose the part that we actually want to harvest, there's not much we can do about it, and that crop can't really recover very much when 50% of an ear's already been taken and it's not even the end of August. So if we look into the 2026 season and what grasshoppers might look like, well, we had some drought conditions in 2025. We also had areas of observed and also reported very large grasshopper populations. And so a lot's going to depend now going forward on the rest of the winter and the spring conditions. So if we happen to have a drier spring, that tends to be better for grasshoppers. If we have a mild winter, the next few days, that's going to be better for them. And I mentioned snow cover. If we have snow cover and it's a few inches, typically that's enough to prevent those really cold air temperatures from getting deep into the soil. And that's a lot of protection for the insects. So if we look at the most recent drought monitor map, I guess this is technically a week old, but they didn't have the new one up until probably sometime today or tomorrow. We see that there are parts of the state that are in some level of drought. And it actually, our moderate drought down here in the southeast part of the state actually aligns with where some of our larger grasshopper populations have been for the last few years. And so, prediction wise, I would guess that there will still be some issues with grasshoppers down in the southeast part of the state. As we look western, South Dakota, we still see that there's some abnormally dry areas. And again, these are areas we had grasshopper reports in 2025 from this area that were, in some cases, very large populations. So those are areas that we really need to monitor. And really monitoring is going to be key as we go into the 2026 season because nobody has the ability to precisely predict what that's going to look like in terms of these insect populations. So scouting is what we have to do. If we look at the first hard frost, so that's 28 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, freeze in South Dakota during the 2025 fall. What we want to see here in terms of insect reduction is to have probably the light blue color, so end of September to dark green, so early October. That would be pretty ideal for us. We don't want to get too early. That affects the crop's development, especially if we have a late spring. And we really don't like to see brown on the map. However, if we look here, we see varying shades of green. So that means mid to late October. And in some cases, we did not have that first hard frost until sometime in November. There's one area out west in Pennington where they had a very early frost. But again, it's not going to help the whole state. And for the most part, it looks like the grasshoppers had ample time to lay plenty of eggs. So for management, the best thing to do, like I said, is to scout. For grasshoppers, you can either scout using visual counts, which we typically recommend because they're a little bit faster. You can also use a sweep net. If you're doing visual counts, the reason it's just faster is because you stand still, you estimate a square yard around yourself, and you just monitor how many grasshoppers are moving in that space. You're at a threshold if there's 30 to 45 nymphs in the space or 8 adults. And so if you're in a crop and you're at those thresholds, you can manage using foliar insecticides. And it's also important to keep an eye on that. I don't have the pictures up, but there were cases in 2025 where there was a hayfield next to a sunflower field or next to another crop. It was taken out, it was cut, it was baled. And then the reports started to show up to me about how the crop was disappearing. And it's pretty easy to imagine that those large grasshopper populations have to move somewhere. So even if it's not the crop you're necessarily worried about, before you take hay down or grass, make sure you check and see what the grasshopper populations are like so you can determine whether or not you're going to affect the field next to you. Next insect we'll talk about is the alfalfa weevil. Now, in eastern South Dakota, we didn't have a lot of issues with this pest in 2025. As we get central and western South Dakota, it was still an issue, but The reason why we didn't have issues in 2025 once you got on the eastern side is we were brutally cold for 2 weeks and we had no snow cover. And these overwinter either as eggs or as adults, and they're pretty hardy, but they typically depend on a little bit of insulation from snow. Without that, the cold temperatures really knock their populations down. So both the adults and the larvae will feed on alfalfa. Uh, Typically, they're a major issue for our first cutting. However, we're getting to a point, and I visited with other states, they're seeing similar trends where even subsequent regrowth for the second cutting, in rarer instances, third cutting is being affected. And we don't have great answers right now. It's possible that it's just the seasonal trends with the way the spring conditions are, but there's also the chance that there are two populations of this pest in the US, and maybe we're seeing a little bit of overlap, but we don't have any definitive answers on that. Now, between the two, if you see the larvae, they're definitely going to cause more issues because they'll feed on the terminal buds and the new leaves. They're typically a little bit hungrier than the adults. And if we get a lot of feeding from the larvae, we'll actually get severe stunting. And so that can go way beyond the first cutting because I've seen pictures where part of the field was sprayed, part was left alone. And the next cutting, there's about 1.5 foot difference in height. So the injury or damage from these will appear as circular holes on the leaves. When you get a heavy infestation, the leaves will begin to get a ragged or frosted appearance. By the time you see frosted alfalfa plants, it's too late for that cutting, and you're really trying to save maybe the rest of the season. You don't want the plants to get too stressed, but for that particular cutting, it's probably already too late, and you're looking at severe loss. With the alfalfa weevil, we've been testing different products because we've been hearing from other states rumors and evidence of insecticide resistance. But in the eastern part of the state, we've seen nothing that really worried us too much, except in 2023 we tested the product Imidan, and it actually did not perform any better than the untreated control. So over here we have the average number of weevils per 30 stems that were scouted. And that was a little shocking for us, but everything else worked really well on the eastern side of the state in 2023 that we tested. In 2024, we threw out the Imidan. We weren't sure what was going on with it, but we figured we use products that are more widely used anyway, and everything worked really well. We knocked down the populations considerably compared to where we had no product. And so we thought things were looking really good for South Dakota. But, like I said, 2025, we put our plots out, and this tumbleweed going through a field is about how it felt when we were scouting because we found nothing. I mean, we were scouting and scouting when we might be able to, after an hour, find one or two of the larvae. So very low numbers in 2025, depending on where you're at. But out west in the central and western part of the states, there were alfalfa weevils. Patrick Wagner did some research out there. It's a collaborative project we're doing with NDSU. And we tested a couple products to see if there's any signs of resistance. We didn't have enough weevils over on this side of the state to even test, but he had plenty, an abundance, I'd say. And what we're looking at here is mortality. This should go up to 100%, and this is proportion of the rates we tested up to 1x. So 1x is the highest labeled rate. And what we would ideally see is from at least the 1x be up at 100%. As you can see, we didn't get up to 80%. And what we saw here is that instead of being a more or less straight line, it's a curved line. And that means we might be having some issues with the Warrior 2. And so looking at the lethal dose it takes to kill 50% of the population, we are at 1.26 times the 1x rate. And the LD90 was 19, so that's the dose it takes to kill 90% of the population consistently. It was 19.34 times higher than the highest labeled rate. That's not great news for us here in South Dakota. Our research on the eastern side of the state suggests that it's not that bad for us on this side, but in 2026, we are going to be pushing this a little bit harder and hunting down as many alfalfa fields as we can find because there's potentially some issues looming for us in terms of alfalfa weevil management. Now, we also tested Steward out west, and at Sturge's location, it looked much worse, but we need to retest it because Unfortunately, the rates we are using, based on some previous research, we think were part of the issue. We never got up to a 1x rate. And so it's really hard to say that you have a resistance issue when you're at a 10% rate of what you should be spraying. So we can't say too much on that yet, but for Warrior 2, the lambda cyhalothrin, things are potentially not looking great for us in the future. So here's my call out to all of you on the call and at the regional centers today. If you have sprayed alfalfa weevils and they didn't die, or you've had large alfalfa weevil populations for the last few years, especially during 2025, and you're not opposed to letting some entomologists come out and sample your alfalfa weevils, we'll knock the population down by at least a few hundred. We'd sure be happy to come out and test the populations that are out in your fields. And so if you are willing to, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will be at the end of the talk. But we really need to get ahead of this. Other states out west have already been dealing with this. And the best case scenario is we detect it and figure it out early, and then we can switch products and make sure everybody's using something that still works. We're going to switch gears now to corn rootworm. The two species we really see a lot of in South Dakota are the northern corn rootworm. These are the green beetles. They're a little bit smaller in size, and then the western corn rootworm. Now, both species typically cause a lot of economic issues in corn, especially corn on corn. The adults aren't as much of an issue, but they can be during the right conditions. It's really the larvae. The larvae are feeding on the corn roots, which reduces the nutrient and water flow. It also reduces stability if you have a very large population. And so you get reduced yields and potential lodging. For the western corn rootworms, if you're not familiar, they're yellow beetles, typically some sort of black markings, either 3 lines or some level of black marking on their hardened forewings. And they're a little bit larger than the northern corn rootworm. Right now, the eggs for both species are out in our soil. They're hopefully freezing a little bit, but probably not because they're very, very hardy. And because it was a little drier, they probably got put down in the soil a little deeper this year. But what we know is that the eggs are going to be in the soil until sometime in June. So typically coincides pretty well with when corn's already up and getting established. The larvae will hatch. They'll start feeding on those corn roots. Depending on nutrition and soil temperature, they'll eventually start to pupate sometime in June, late June, and continue until sometime in July or August. And then we typically get, at least in our fields, we start to notice the adults start to emerge sometime just about middle of July. Seems pretty consistent. About July 15th to 17th, we start to see the first adults. And then they continue for the rest of the season. The adults will lay eggs and the cycle continues. For corn rootworms, we use a rootworm node injury scale for our research. We'd recommend if you think you're having an issue, this is one of the things you can do to determine how bad your pressure is out in your field. I will tell you though, after years of digging corn roots, that this is a lot of work. For our research, we're typically digging thousands of roots in about a period of a week. And so it's great cardio and upper body workouts, but you will feel it the next day. So what we're looking for is ideally a rating of 0. That's where we have no apparent feeding. The roots are healthy. You can tell there isn't much scarring or discoloration on them. Then next case is not as positive, but you get to a node injury scale of 1. It means at least one full node of roots was destroyed to within 1.5 inches of the stalk. For this, we're actually looking at nodes 4, 5, and 6. So it's right here, 6, 5, 4. It's a little hard to see on the picture, I'm sure, but they're right. The node 7 is the brace root, so we're starting right below that. And so what we're looking for is anything that's pruned. And this picture down here on the bottom is a great example of very pruned roots, but on the ones that are in between, you're looking for things that are obviously pruned. You'll notice discoloration. When you get to a rating of 1 to 1.9, you're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 15% yield loss. A rating of 2 to 2.9, you're looking at 30% yield loss. And if you get to a rating of 3, it's about 45% yield loss from research studies. Also, you will no longer need a shovel for digging those roots because you'll go out, you'll grab it, and before you know it, it's up in the air because nothing's holding that root down in the soil anymore. And so that's what we don't want to get to. And those are kind of our worst case scenarios. There is another option for scouting for corn rootworm, and it's actually monitoring for the adult populations. This needs to be done from sometime in mid-July through August. And all you do is you buy these unbaited yellow sticky cards. I just peeked at it today. I didn't get my slide updated in time, but Gimplers has them, and they're currently $1.84 a piece. So uh, during 2020, these things went up to close to $3 a piece. They have since come back down to where they've been essentially for the last decade in terms of price. But you need at most probably 4 per field. We typically recommend try to get the corners of the field or at least a couple per field, and you want them in a ways so you're not just right on the edge of the field in the end rows. But you go out there, you put it on. You can see comes with the little ties. You tie it right onto the stalk. You go back a week later, you replace it. The ones you pulled out, you count the number of rootworms that are present, and you're at threshold anytime one of your cards has 2 adults on it in a week. And it doesn't matter if it's one northern or one western, it's 2 adult rootworms, and you're at threshold. And so the benefits of this is that it's a lot quicker. You don't need to dig the roots, you don't need to wash the roots and rate them. You can just look at the card. And both of these methods, though, are really not going to help you in season. You're scouting for the next year. So if you're doing corn on corn, you're scouting for the next year, next season. If you're on a rotation, you're scouting for the next time corn will be in that field, in addition to if you have fields in close proximity. And so that's a really key thing, though. There are no rescue treatments for larval feeding. So once the seed's in the ground, we better have had our best efforts present to try to reduce the rootworm pressure. And I said typically the adults aren't an issue, but sometimes we get very large adult populations of rootworms. In those cases, what's referred to as beetle bombing sometimes happens. One of the big things with that is we need to make sure, especially if we're using a soil applied at plant insecticide, we are not using the same active ingredient to beetle bomb. We need to make sure we're rotating classes ideally, but also AIs if that's the best we can do. And the reason for that is if we put pressure on the larvae, well, the larvae didn't die, and now they hatched out as adults and emerged as adults, and we spray them with the same product. Number one, it's not going to work. Number two, if it's low level issue with resistance, we're driving selection pressure towards worse issues. And so we need to make sure we're being very careful in our management. And so if you do have issues, though, foliar insecticides are the option. With the adults, the big issue is either feeding on the tassels or feeding on the silks. It takes quite a few beetles. The threshold's 5 beetles or more per ear, and your pollination's less than 50%, and silks are clipped to within a ½ inch of the tip of the husk, and that warrants a spray. So ideally, we don't get to that level. Hopefully, the rootworms don't take off here in the next year, but into 2026, but it's hard to say. We did see pretty normal numbers in 2025, so chances are they are going to show up and be a bit of an issue for us. I'll switch gears again, and the next pest we're going to talk about is the Dectes stem borer, not in sunflower, but in soybeans. So this is a native pest. They're a gray beetle. This is what we'll typically see out in June, July, and August in the soybean fields. If you start splitting soybeans that look like they're getting a little wilty, you might find the larvae, but they're much harder to find. Soybean have not always had a history with this pest, and it actually wasn't until the late 1960s that Dectes stem borer were reported as a pest of soybean. In South Dakota, historically, it's been a very minor pest. Very small issues with this, mostly an issue in sunflower forests in South Dakota. There are alternative hosts, which include both common and giant ragweed, cocklebur, and wild sunflower. They really love cultivated sunflower, so if you happen to be next to a sunflower field with your soybeans, you probably won't ever have an issue because they're going to go to the sunflower field. This just shows that this is from a study from quite a few years ago, back in 2007. They published it in 2010, but historically, it was reported as an occasional pest in soybean here in the state. The adults emerge in the spring. They mate, they lay the eggs in the petioles of the current year's soybean. The larvae hatch, tunnel into the main stem, and they'll feed up and down in the main stem pretty much until the end of the season. Once the plant starts to dry down, they start wrapping things up and they get ready to overwinter down at the base of the plant. They actually make themselves a nice little home down close to the soil surface in the stem. And so they have one generation per year here in South Dakota. Now, if we look at the historical management recommendations for Dectes, the first thing you see is do not use foliar insecticides. Tillage is a great option. More close evaluation of that, it's an okay option. The catch there is we have a lot of acres going into no-till here in South Dakota. Management of weedy hosts is great, crop rotation, early harvest of infested fields. I always say if you've ever tried to harvest a field of soybeans that isn't ready yet, you know that that's not a great option. It just does not go, and you're going to probably plug up the combine and cause more of a mess than if you just waited and saw some of your plants lodged or not. But what we've been doing the last few years is trying to get a handle on how bad our issues are in South Dakota. And the reason for that is that the larval tunneling in soybean will reduce yields by 10 to 15%. In addition, 17% of infested plants will lodge under normal conditions. And we've seen out in the field, this is what a cut plant looks like. So the larva cuts the plant from the inside out. Under normal conditions, it varies. A light wind might not see hardly any lodging, especially if it hasn't been wet, as opposed to if you have a little bit of wind, if the beans were a little on the taller side, all of a sudden you may be looking at a mess. One of the things we saw, it's not proven with research, but drilled beans seem to be a little bit more tolerant, potentially just because they were so close, they fell into each other and didn't fall straight to the ground. So since 2017 here in South Dakota, though, we've been having steadily increasing reports in terms of infestations. When we go out to those fields since 2022, we're noticing rapid increase in the number of plants infested per field. Most recently, we were in some fields and we saw greater than 80% infestation. So that's getting very high and potentially getting to the point where we will start to notice that yield loss. And primarily the fields started out in Yankton and Bon Homme counties. However, the number of counties that we're observing it in have been increasing. In 2024, in 2023, we did some research. We tested currently labeled products. So these are products that are labeled for Dectes in soybean in South Dakota. We used two different spray dates. So we did a early July, a late July, and then we sprayed both times. Late are the darker colored bars. The hash lines here represent the combo treatments. The untreated control here is white, and then the lighter gray bars here are the early treatment. The main thing I want to point out is that Hero insecticide applied late July had significantly better yield than the untreated control. Nothing else really stood out at our minnow location. And then if we look at our Tabor location where we had higher pressure of the Dectes stem borer, we saw that there were actually 4 products. Hero late again did very well, and then Vantacor, Elevist, and Hero in combination, so that's early and late, all outperformed our untreated control. What this tells us is that that initial historical management recommendation of not using insecticides maybe is not the best recommendation because it looks like we can get some economic returns. And if it's, statistically significant, that means 95% of the time you're going to see that result. If we look at the economics of it, and this is the part that I was most interested in when we were doing the research, because that was historically the reason why they said not to use insecticides, is that you just won't make any money. Well, this is using some old values now, but if we look at Hero, we had a 9.1 bushel per acre increase compared to the untreated control at a soybean price of just a little over $10, an estimated application plus insecticide cost of $25.48 an acre. We are looking at about $66 or $67 per acre yield benefit. 95% of the time we'd see that benefit from one application. And so other thing to note is we had no lodging. If we had lodging, may have had even higher yield improvement. But maybe we have a higher field with a little higher pressure, and maybe 2 treatments are necessary. So for our study, we just used one product applied twice. That's not ideal for resistance management. If we look at the Vantacor, we'll notice right away the estimated application cost is much higher. The benefit was still close to 8 bushels per acre, but it costs a lot more to use Vantacor. It's just a little bit more expensive on the front for the product. And 2 treatments of Vantacor would net you $2.57 per acre. Now, there were a few other treatments I'm not listing The reason for that is they were negative. So there was not a benefit to applying those, even though there was a yield benefit, the overall cost became negative. And so my recommendation going forward is the later July period seems to be pretty crucial for us in terms of management for DECTs, and we're doing a lot more research on that as we go forward because there's the potential that there's going to be some other trends we see. But one of the things for trying to not develop resistance in DECT stem borers, instead of using one insecticide twice, maybe switch. And based on our research, the two best products were Vantacor and Hero. So we proposed doing Vantacor early, Hero a couple weeks later. You should still be seeing something in the ballpark of 7 to 9 bushel per acre increase. And with the two products, the total cost is $63.78 an acre. And so you'd be looking at about $29 an acre benefit. Not as good as just the Hero by itself, but that if you are very risk averse and don't want to have potential issues from the DECT stem borer lodging and you know it's out there by scouting, this would probably be the best case scenario. Big thing with the DECT stem borer management, though, is correct application timing, and that's potentially going to vary on year to year. So we're continuing to evaluate that. Peak emergence does seem to occur sometime in July here in South Dakota, and we're looking at some degree day values to see if we can really hone in on when that peak should be occurring based on temperature. Hopefully, we get that data out in the next year. And so the big thing, though, is don't just go spray your soybeans because you think you have DECTs. You do need to confirm the DECTs are present in the field with a sweep net. You can't go out and just scout DECTs with your eyes because they're kind of sneaky. We also have the gray blister beetle, which looks very similar, minus the fact that it has very short antenna compared to the DECT stem borer. And the DECT stem borer a lot of times also will just fall off the plant if it gets scared. So a sweep net's really the best thing there. We also surveyed for DECT stem borer, and I saw your note, Stephen. I'll try to wrap things up here pretty quickly. But for 2 years, we surveyed this pest throughout South Dakota. In 2023, we saw pretty much where we expected. Southeast part of the state had some numbers. In 2024, we pushed our sampling back a little bit due to the weather, and we found a lot more DECTs. And that tells us that there's a little bit of a seasonal variation at the start of the year on when these things are becoming active. It's probably just temperature dependent, but start a little bit later. We saw some, excuse me on that. Saw some very large numbers, and it still is primarily in the southeastern part of the state. One of the things we notice is it does seem to be expanding eastward. I am working on a multi-state project now with North Central Soybean Research Program. So multiple states that are also having DECTs. It's not just South Dakota. But if we imagine a lot of that's going to be down, and imagine the rest of the states are on my map here, that's down to the south and east of us also. One of the things that I thought was interesting, my student Zach Loomis worked on this project, and he continued scouting. We initially knocked the northern counties out because we scouted a lot of fields, came up with a lot of zeros, and we wanted to really focus down in the southeast part of the state in 2024. He still scouted a little further north, and I asked him to, he was curious. And we did get hits, it was 1 to 2, but we found DECT stem borer in counties where there's been no reports in soybean. And so that tells us that there is a potential that they're a little bit more widespread than we even think. And what worries me the most are these potentially isolated hotspots where it's really, really high populations. Those are those fields that are at 80+% infestation. And we really need to figure out where all of those are so we can get some good management going on in those fields. So infestations are probably going to continue increasing because it looked like numbers were still pretty much the same in 2025. We don't know how far these fly, so that affects our knowledge of how the dispersal is going to be affected from year to year. We are working on that, and there are probably a lot of soybean fields potentially infested with the DECT stem borer. And so if we go ahead, we're going to wrap up. Here are some additional slides I have for everyone from the USDA and the SDSU extension. If you have any questions about any of the content from today's talk, please feel free to reach out to me. Easiest way probably is to reach out to my office phone number. And if that doesn't work, feel free to email me with your question. If you have fields that you'd like us to scout, you think you have an alfalfa weevil population that's resistant to insecticides, please again, reach out and we'd be happy to come sample your fields and let you know what's going on. Otherwise, Stephen, I'll turn things back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Does anybody have any questions for Adam? I have put his contact information into the chat as well as the extension website that's dedicated to him. So please feel free, copy and paste that, get a hold of that information. So if anything comes up during the year, just feel free to reach out to Adam. He's more than happy to help, and his expertise will get you there. So really important. All right. Well, we've got a couple, it's gonna go. We got a couple minutes before the break, so I'm gonna step in and share my screen here just because there's something that came up, and I want you guys to be familiar with this. So Adam mentioned I spelled it wrong, but the gray blister beetle, you can see just how close that looks to the Dectes stem borer. It's got that gray velvety look at it. Importantly, never, ever, ever grab these animals. These animals, you can see how it's got what we call it's the pronotum. They have a thin neck, and so their backside is wider than their thin neck, and their head is also bigger than their thin neck. If you see that, don't grab those animals. These animals release a chemical that they're called blister beetles for a reason. If it gets onto your skin, it can create a serious issue where your skin boils up into a blister, it'll pop, it is extremely painful, and it's a chemical burn. So it's actually burning you throughout. But when it comes to safety, stop sharing that. When it comes to safety, when it comes to using insecticides, Adam talked a little bit about sunflowers, the red sunflower seed weevil, and currently in South Dakota, we have a special local needs approval for the use of malathion until 2030 in sunflowers to control. Now, the efficacy of using an organophosphate on an already potentially resistant group of organisms. Maybe not the most effectual. That said, it is an option that, as long as you're using the appropriate rates, you're making sure that your distribution is nice and even throughout the field. We have seen that there has been some decent control. I won't speak much to that. That is Adam's forte. But importantly, what I wanted to say is that if you guys use malathion, if you use chlorpyrifos, it's currently not on the market, but if you use organophosphates or carbamates, these are things that get into the human system and they can have a prominent effect. It's a CNS. It acts on your central nervous system, so it can make you extremely twitchy. It doesn't allow you to settle down. And so if you're using those on a consistent basis, it's really important to get yourself tested for cholinesterase. And I have a little deal here. Make sure you take this down. If you guys are using those carbamates or using those organophosphates, go ahead, take this down. Get yourself tested. Make sure you're paying attention to it. The overall result of this could be death. That is a possibility from getting a high concentration of cholinesterase in your system. You're unable to process things. You're basically unable to shut down your nervous system. So you can go into shock. You can go into anaphylaxis. Just make sure you keep yourself protected. Something I also wanted to point out is that we have our 2026 pest management guides, thanks to the insect team here at SDSU. So I'm going to share those with you guys, or at least share the link with you. Don't hesitate to grab these links, hop on, and these are the digital copies. This will take you to those digital copies directly. And the other one is going to be a request form. That is through Qualtrics. That goes to us. We actually mail these out. If you need a physical copy, we're happy to mail those to them. Just shoot a request to us. You can only request up to 3. That's a lot. Hopefully you're requesting less than that. And for you guys that are in person, you don't need to write this stuff down. We have a set of links that are available to you. You just need to ask your host and say, hey, can I get those links? Yes, you can actually click the link on paper, but it does give it to you so you could type it in. It's kind of annoying that way, but either way, we give you the set of resources. And if you want a link, just reach out to me. I'm happy to share that with you guys. All right. Make sure that I got that. Good. And I'll hold back on sharing the weed guides until after our last talk with Eric Jones. But up next, Connie, are you ready to to get started. Let's see, when is Connie starting here?
I will do my share. I didn't know if you were going to have them take a break or not.
Yeah, we are. So we've got about 5 minutes, Connie. I just wanted to make sure that you got the share up and that it's working okay. Everybody in person at home, take a 5 minute break. Let's get back here at 3 o'clock. We'll get started on our next presentation. Again, so here's the problem. I made these things and they're really cool. Like I said, I just took get it into the screen here. I just took the Department of Ag and Natural Resources form and turned it into 2 pages so that we could put it into a notebook. Front part here, you got a legal land description or a place to draw, and then we've got all of your required records. They're here. So this is a start to providing you a resource that you could use on a routine basis. This has 35 entries in it. Next year, I think I'm probably going to increase that or decrease it maybe to 30 and then have land descriptions up front. Something that you guys are going to have to consider, and we'll start hitting the education for it next year at these private applicator trainings. Are going to be ESA mitigations. It's going to affect the way that we apply chemical on ag lands as well as any other place. It's going to affect the way that we apply chemical. Not by much. It's more of a daunting verbal nightmare than it actually is in practice. In practice, you guys are probably already doing everything you need to. I think Eric's going to talk about it a little bit closer to the end of the day, but you're probably already doing what you need to be doing in order to make this work. You just need to know that it's happening so that you protect yourself. And a lot of it is going to be making sure that you keep the appropriate records. So not just wind speed. You'll have to indicate your buffer zone. How long was your buffer zone? Why did you choose that depth of buffer zone? You have to relate back to the label and say, original buffer zone was 150, but I do these 2 things to mitigate the possibility for runoff. And so or for drift, and so I can reduce that by 50%. So my buffer zone was 75 feet. That sounds like a nightmare when it's just in words, but again, in practice, it's actually much simpler. And like I said, we'll start hitting that a little bit more intensely next year. So if you have an interest in seeing what's going on, don't hesitate. Pop on, keep an ear out to what's movement in EPA. Reach out to me. We can chit chat about this stuff. It'll be more of a me telling you what's what, and that's not fun for people. But new regulations, they make changes and they expect you to know them. So we are here to issue that education. Don't hesitate to reach out, ask about it. All right. It is 3 o'clock. I hope everybody is sitting their butts back in their seats and we are ready to continue on with this education to certify and recertify private applicators in South Dakota. Up next, we've got Connie Strunk. She is our SDSU Extension Plant Pathology Field Specialist. She works with Madeline Shires, Dr. Madeline Shires, and covers the diseases in crops. Like everybody that I speak to about SDSU, she is an expert and she knows her diseases, so please pay attention. I know crop diseases aren't necessarily the most important, but things can change and your isolated condition of having a serious disease problem, this could be important to you. So make sure that you're respectful of everybody else. Allow them to listen and pay attention yourself. This could pop up in your field. Any one of these things could show up in your field, and being aware of it and knowing how to respond to it is really going to save you a heck of a lot of problems and a heck of a lot of money. So, Connie, are you ready to go?
I am.
Well, then I will pass it off to you. Thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to everything.
Sounds great. I'm not able to get the video to go to me, but that's all right. Anyhow, we'll go ahead and get started. Like Stephen said, my name is Connie Strunk. I'm the plant field specialist, and I'm housed at Sioux Falls Regional Extension Center. So this is where I would consider home. And I work with plant diseases and what we call agronomic crops: corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, so on and so forth. I've got a stunt double who's also located in Brookings. His name is Cody, and he works as horticulture specialty crops. So if you have any of them, you'll be working with him on that. But we'll go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to talk about is, how does fungal disease develop? When we talk about disease developing, when we work with fungicides, right? That's where you're here to spray for us for fungicides. We work with fungal diseases. Well, we have what we call a plant disease triangle. We need 3 major pieces to overlap to be able to have disease develop. So the very first thing that we would have is what we call our susceptible host. So our plants, right? Corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, sunflower, whatever crop or plant you're growing. So it's a susceptible host. Then we have our potential pathogen, right? Whether it's residue borne or it blows up here, we have our fungal pathogen that's putting some pressure on. But then we need that right environment. We need the right weather. If it's warm and moist, we can get disease develop. If it's cool and moist, we can get disease to develop. Generally, if it's hot and dry, we don't see fungal diseases develop unless we have some form of moisture. Now, moisture can be rain, it can be irrigation, it can be humidity. So if there's any little bit of moisture out there, sets it up for the perfect opportunity for disease to develop. So again, depends on the weather, the host, that inoculum, so what disease pressure is there. When we apply a fungicide, we're really protecting the leaves and the stems, so protecting that plant from disease from development. When we take a look at the plants, here on the screen, I've got some wheat plants pictured. Really, where we look for disease, kind of gives us a few ideas of what type of disease we're working with. So if we look at this wheat plant way to the left, and we see, so the red, right? So we're seeing infection on roots and that lower, the subcrown internode. Where do we think the disease is coming from? Do we think it's blowing in? Do we think it's from rain? Do we think it's seed-borne, residue-borne, soil-borne? Well, in the way of looking at that roots and that subcrown internode, we're looking at either a soil-borne or a seed-borne pathogen. So it's starting right at the heart of that plant. So we want to have a seed treatment or pay attention to what's happening within that root system of that plant. If we change gears and we look at the next plant over, so one over, and we're looking at those lower leaves, it's a little bit further from a seed-borne or soil-borne type pathogen, but it's not quite high up in that canopy enough to be wind-borne. So it's more likely a residue-borne disease. So we see kind of like those first few leaves on the ground, because the residues that remain there as the rain or humidity, whatnot, things will come and allow the spores up and into that lower part of the canopy. If we move over one plant, we look at that top part of the plant, so we're looking at that upper canopy, we're looking at wind-blowing pustules, wind-blowing things coming in and settling down onto the plant. And then for some diseases, the timing affects during that flowering time frame. So if you're a wheat grower, fusarium head blight is during that flowering time frame. If you go too early or you miss the window and you go afterwards, you miss that window of protection against this disease. We also have a disease like that in soybean that I'll talk about. So really, as a plant diagnostician, if we take a look not only at your affected plant, but we look at all the other plants around, because that tells us a lot. If things are being windblown, is it residue-borne, soil-borne, that sort of thing. So really symptoms and where we're seeing it on the plant makes a whole host of difference. When we start looking at, questions, whether or not we get a yield benefit, right? If we want to see yield, if we apply fungicide, some of the most effective is if we have, the more disease out there, the higher probability that a fungicide would work. The susceptibility of that variety, right? So if you're a really tolerant variety, you're not going to get a lot of extra benefit. But if you're a variety that is very susceptible to disease, obviously you're going to see the quickest get me, right, by applying a fungicide. The inoculum density, meaning how much disease is out there. So kind of thinking back to this past growing season, what diseases did you have issues with? Big one that we'll talk about as we go through is, southern rust on corn. Anybody have issues with that? Pretty much every cornfield I went into had some level of southern rust out there. And then when we really talk about the fungicide, it would be, that weather, right? So what is that weather pattern? Moisture brings a lot of things to fruition for us here in South Dakota with that disease triangle. But again, we're kind of in a sweet spot because stuff doesn't typically overwinter here. It has to blow up. So that makes the job hard, right? We can't say for sure we're going to have this disease again. We do have some stuff that's residue borne, but we don't have as many issues as we would for the stuff that's blowing up like a rust. And so the other big part is the growth stage of the crop when disease develops. Obviously, the younger the plant is when it gets disease, the higher probability of the largest yield loss. If it's later in the season, you may not need a fungicide to combat that disease. And I'll kind of walk through and talk through some examples as to what I mean when we talk about that. Some other things to consider when you're looking at fungicide use, right, is it a big, heavy, large leaf spotting disease, or does it have more smaller spots on it, right? Because the more spots and the bigger those spots, the more production is warranted. So it affects the yield a little faster and a little bit more. When looking at the timing of fungicide, not all fungicide, kind of like not all seed treatments are treated the same. And they have different products, but not all of them conquer and work with all diseases out there. So you have to be very careful as to which product you're selecting. And then not only that, the timing, right? There's preventative fungicides and then there's curative, meaning you don't have the disease yet. Now you have the disease. We want to stop it from making it get worse within the plant. So timing of fungicide, and then the efficacy. Again, not all families of products work with all disease, and some, the timing might make things worse. For example, with Fusarium head blight or scab, for those that are wheat, we have the dawn levels, right? If you have that disease, if we would apply a strobilurine family of fungicide to control for Fusarium head blight, we see higher dawn level. We don't necessarily see, we don't see more symptoms out there. It's just that mycotoxin level gets exasperated within there. So those are things to think about in making some of those choices. And we do have some efficacy charts and things that we have been developed for your use. So questions that I get asked a lot are, well, when's the best time to apply some fungicide? Or when should I do the fungicide? Well, in soybeans, right? If you're going into cooler, wetter ground, really look at a seed treatment for the seed or soil-borne diseases such as SCN, SDS, which is sudden death syndrome, or Phytophthora. So a seed treatment could be beneficial, but in South Dakota, quite honestly, research has been about a 50-50. Some years it pays, some years it doesn't. Kind of depends on what month you're going in, and then ultimately how much moisture do we end up getting for that growing season. Now timing, or do we need that fungal fungicide for foliar application or not? When looking at the timing for diseases such as frog eye leaf spots or Cercospora, meaning any of the fungal diseases that are not white mold, the best time of growth is that R3 to R4. R3 is that beginning seed timing, or the beginning pod timing. R4 is whole pod time frame. So that's the sweet spot for fungal diseases that are not white mold. Now, if you've had an issue with white mold out there, the best timing is a bit earlier, because white mold is a lot like Fusarium head blight. It needs that flowering time frame to get into the plant. So white mold is a little bit earlier of an application for fungicide. So we're looking at that R1 beginning flower to that R2 full flower timing for protection, because we're putting on a preventative fungicide. So we're putting it on at that flowering time frame. Now, as there's specific active ingredients within those fungicides to protect against white mold. If we wait, skip that flowering time frame and say, well, I'm just going to put it on at that R3, R4. Well, this disease enters in when the plant is flowering. You've missed that window. You have protection against the other diseases. You're not getting protection against white mold. So again, timing is everything. So with soybeans, that R1, R2 is the best time for white mold. R3, R4 is really that potting time frame, and that's for the other fungal diseases. And why we say that with white mold, right? So white mold, again, just pointing out that it shows up during that flowering time frame. So it resides in the soil, or can reside in the soil, as some sclerotia bodies. Anyhow, as it transpires without the life cycle, little mushrooms will develop or come through. They would open up and release the spores into that canopy, especially if you have tighter rows, higher population, so there's more moisture, so more humidity. When it gets into that flowering time frame, it allows those spores to enter into that plant and then begin the white mold structure. And this is just a picture of, well, one of the fields that had white mold or has white mold looks like out there. So you're gonna start to see some of those dying plants. Take a little closer look, and then you may start to see the sclerotia on the outside of the stem, especially if you start to split the stems, you're gonna see the kind of white coloring, and you're gonna see those black sclerotia bodies as the season progresses on. Anyhow, in switching gears, the best time to apply a fungicide in corn, really ideally tasseling, starting at tassel to R1, so that beginning of our reproductive phases. So tasseling, beginning of reproductive. Now, that is for all of our fungal diseases, but we're starting to see a couple of diseases the last few years here in South Dakota. Last year was a pretty big epidemic of southern rust. Prior to the last 2 years, I would have always cautioned saying, if you have late maturing or late planted corn, be mindful, be watching for southern rust, because typically it would blow into South Dakota in September, October, really close to black layer. We had no effects. We didn't need a fungicide. It was just one of those things that we saw sometimes, because it's more of a warmer season disease. And again, it doesn't overwinter here, it just blows up. Well, the past 2 years have shown that to be a little bit different. We started to see southern rust blowing in August, and then last year was in July. So with that, if you would need to apply a fungicide, you're seeing the disease out there, you've had problems with it, past, just all of that, like the environment is saying, yep, we need to be applying fungicide. Again, VT, so that tassel up to R3 stage of growth, which would be that ideal sweet spot time for southern rust control. At the R4 stage would be if disease pressure was severe, because now we're at that dose stage and things are starting to get a little bit late. So R4 is really up in the air as to how bad it is out there. So scouting is really important for growth staging. If you're not familiar with how to growth stage, let us know. We can certainly work with you to kind of get you up to speed on that, because a lot of what we talk about when we read through the label and we look at the products and try to make selections, especially in the case of southern rust, or maybe you've heard of the corn disease called tar spot, same type of thing. We need to know really the timing of what growth stage it is as to whether or not it's truly going to be beneficial. Because once we reach a certain point, yep, you can apply the fungicide, but it's not going to make any difference for that disease, and then the economic end starts to play against you. So, a few things there to think about. For those of you that are wheat growers, the timings that we'll mention again, an early season fungicide, generally recommended if you're under no-till, or if you're wheat on wheat, or if you're starting to see stripe rust develop early, then we encourage an early season fungicide rate. Otherwise, the big ones to watch out for are at that flag leaf and head. Flag leaf, because we want to protect the flag leaf, because that gives us the best, it sets our yield, right? So the old saying of protect the flag leaf at all costs, because that flag leaf is going to set and determine that yield. We do have some scouting and some different tools available to help you make those management decisions. So if you see this climate.sdstate.edu tools, which is called small grains, it will help the risk factor of whether or not a fungicide would be needed out there. And that is looking at the leaf-based diseases. And then you do address some of the Fusarium head blight with the heading. The other disease, one that we feed information into, is what we call the Penn State wheat scab model. which is used to determine the risk for scab in head. So again, I encourage you to take a look at those two websites for that information if you are a wheat grower to really help with those. So as we're kind of looking at the screen here, you know, within this past couple of years, we typically have seen some level of common rust out in the field. We don't typically have to spray for it. It usually comes in pretty early, so about June, and then it's kind of done for, right? Well, the other disease that we started to see an influx the last 2 years is southern rust. It comes more in that latter part of the growing season, like those warmer temperatures. In the room here and online, are you able to see the difference between common rust, southern rust? Do you know which one's which? Well, we're going to go into some tips and tricks as to how to identify them. But common rust is on the top here. We'll see with that darker color, they're a little bit more scattered throughout the leaf, and they're typically on the upper and lower leaf, or side of the leaf. Southern rust is a little bit lighter in color, and they tend to be more densely packed and a little bit smaller in shape on the leaf. But as these lesions age up, the color starts to fall out, so you can't go on color alone. But again, common rust, those pustules appear on the upper and lower leaf side of the leaf, or on both sides of the leaf, if you will. They're typically brown to reddish brown, elongated in shape, scattered. And again, they like a little bit cooler for temperature, so that's 61 to 77 degrees for optimal infection. Now, southern rust, which we've seen a lot of last year, and we saw quite a bit in 2024 also with southern rust. Those lesions or pustules appear primarily on the upper leaf surface. They're orange to light brown, again, a little bit smaller in shape, so a little bit round. They're densely packed, and they like that warmer temperature. Anyhow, as we kind of go into, and we'll talk more about southern rust as we go through, but the one disease that I want to take a few minutes to talk about is tar spot. It's relatively new to the United States and South Dakota. You know, it's first documented in 2015, so it's a fungal disease first documented in 2015 to the United States. In South Dakota, we found it for the first time in 2022 in 6 counties, primarily in the southeast. Then in 2023, we only saw it in 3 counties, which were 3 of those original 6 counties. And then in 2024, crazy things happened because we saw it in 46 counties. So pretty much any from the river on over to the east, we were able to find tar spots. So this was a look at that map. The original, I'm not sure what happened with the little drawing, but anyhow, all of the orange is 2024. And then in 25, we went and we were doing a lot of sampling, a lot of surveying. We're starting to see it in a lot of the counties that we had seen it the year before. As we were going through our sampling season, SDSU had determined a different way for us to do sampling and surveying, and we need official written permission to go on to and get producer fields and whatnot. And so we were not able to get all the paperwork done to hit every field since then. But what we did find was that, again, southern rust started in the, or tar spot started in the southeast at the end of July. So we found it earlier than the year before. So it started in July, and it kind of progressed within the state. Tar spot has some different phases of the disease. This first one is called flecking, or has some mild chlorosis. It's really easy to miss because it's kind of a yellowing. It can almost look like drought. It can almost look like there's some nitrogen issues. So again, that flecking, mild chlorosis, a little easier to miss. As you start to see the symptoms or lesions develop, you'll see the yellowing behind the black, so that's a little easier to find. But just that flecking or chlorosis on its own, it's a little bit hard to see out there. When we start looking at the black spots or the stroma, when they start to form, they're usually black, really dark in color. They're raised they're elongated. And they start out very small, kind of like the size of a pinhead, and then they start to elongate and stretch out. They're visible on both sides of the leaf. And the biggest thing is it cannot be rubbed off. As you're looking at my screen here, you're starting to see the black. It looks a lot like insect grass and other things out there. If you cannot wipe it off, there's a good chance that you're looking at a disease. Now, we did have some lookalikes and some issues that were a little harder last summer, but again, that rubbing off is huge. If it doesn't rub off, it's a good sign that you're probably looking at a disease. The other one that I'll show you is a symptom called fisheye. It's kind of tan to brown in color and it resembles a fisheye. We have not seen the fisheye here in South Dakota, but our neighboring states have had that symptom out there. So again, this is looking at that flecking and chlorosis, kind of seeing that yellowing, almost like the leaf is getting a little bit older. And you're starting to see a lot of little black tiny lesions or pustules start to develop and they start to elongate. In looking at this slide here, again, we're looking at southern rust. I circled the example for the lesion in the red. This was the initial infection on this leaf, and that has kind of spread all of the other ones out. As we go through, you can catch, you'll start to see like almost like a little halo effect around each of the lesions. But as things start, you may see like this orange pycnidia, which is that reproductive phase. And then that is what spreads and transpires within that leaf. So again, we can have quite drastic. It can be heavily packed and dense down there, which was very, we saw a lot of that down in the southeastern part of the state. And we had some fields and some plots in the northern part of the state that were pretty heavy with some of that infestation. This is that little orange pycnidia mass underneath magnification, but you can see it if you catch it in the right light with a naked eye out in the field too. So this is the part that would cause that reproduction of those lesions. Now this would be the fisheye lesion, which I've circled in the red here, kind of seeing that really tan around, and you see that dark spot in the middle. It's known as that fisheye. Typically, we have not seen it here in South Dakota, but our neighboring states have had this as a symptom. This would be another representative picture of what we were seeing in the southeast. These pictures were actually taken not in South Dakota, but this was what some of that severity that we were finding in the southeastern part of the state from this past year. Now, fungicide alone was not warranted. When we look at tar spot, it appears later in the season, but it's been starting to start earlier. Meaning, when we first found it in 2022, we found it in October. And then, like, we found it on a Tuesday and fields were harvested by Thursday, right? So we found it late. And then it's kind of moved up a little bit, We did find some in August. Some of the counties that had the high infestations or infections were found in August, both of 2024, 2025, but typically we're more in that southeastern part of the state, meaning Union, Clay, Yankton, Turner, Minnehaha, Lincoln, Bonham, or Charles Mix. So if you're in one of those counties, we've had issues with tar spot. Doesn't mean you're going to have it again, because wind-blown pustules are our major source of infection here in the state. But we do have a little bit of residue borne that we speculate for some of the really heavy fields. So we're doing some research to double check some of the overwintering. Now these cold temperatures we're hoping will help reduce that. But we did see some minor infections in residue in 2025, both in South Dakota and North Dakota. But again, the primary source of infection is wind-blown spores. With some of the maps and information that I'm going to show and talk about, they're found on Crop Protection Network. Again, this is going to show the corn, some of the corn stuff, but also you can find soybean information, you can find wheat, you can find a lot of other crop information on here. They have very good fungicide efficacy tools, return on investment stuff. We have different mapping that we feed into. So the maps that I showed, we were able to churn color as to where we were finding the disease. Same with those in Minnesota, North Dakota, all around us. We have a yield loss calculator, a beam binocular, really kind of looking at some of these soybean diseases. So again, Crop Production Network, if you're not familiar with it, great tool to check out and take a look at. And looking at, we work with, so South Dakota is just one, we work regionally with the other Midwest states or North Central states to kind of put into some recommendations, and especially like Illinois, Missouri, some that are really seeing heavy yield loss due to tar spot, right? So they're seeing over 60 bushels an acre yield loss to this disease. We have not seen that here in South Dakota. In fact, it hasn't paid for us to apply a fungicide for tar spot in South Dakota as of this point. But this is just one of the timings, right? So really recommend VT would be the time to start. If you have an issue with tar spot or seeing it, that you may need to apply an application. Some states or areas, they may have to do a second application, even though they've applied that fungicide. So again, this information on tar spot is found on the website there, on the Crop Protection Network. Great information. Just one real quick. So we say that VTR1 is kind of like the right sweet spot to apply for fungal diseases in corn. When is VTR1 in South Dakota, roughly on a calendar? You think it's June? August? Well, typically, you see kind of mid to late July. So almost August is when we would want to start. So if we're starting to apply a fungicide in June, probably too early. Just really wanting to kind of get you familiar with when to start scouting and looking at or applying for some of these diseases. So again, up to that milk stage for tar spot, that R4, that doe stage is if there's severe disease. We do have a disease forecasting model for tar spot and some other diseases. This one's just looking at the corn. Again, a lot of the same type of tools exist for soybean diseases and wheat diseases, but these risk models we're able to put in our location, put in our dates, and it kind of gives you a little idea of whether or not a fungicide would be needed when it takes account into that weather and whatnot. Now, again, these are all great tools to utilize, but they don't replace boots on the ground, right? Like you actually know what varieties you planted or hybrids you planted. You're the one that's out there seeing what's happening with the weather and what's happening in the field. So again, great tools, but they don't replace you, right? So you need you to be out there because it's not able to tell you what growth stage the crop is, right? That's what we need you to be doing. But great tools, they help assist on whether or not that fungicide is needed. So again, to kind of recap in South Dakota, did fungicide pay for tar spot? Right now, it's still too early for us to be able to definitively say that it does pay. But really want you to take and hone in on the timing. That VT to that R3 is that optimal time. Take a look at the the weather, what's happening out there, and that disease pressure. As of 2025, like within our growing seasons and what we've seen with the disease, it's been a very slow growing, slow spreading disease because our environment starts to become really hot and dry, and it needs a lot of moisture and humidity for this disease to really move. So, kind of saying, unless you farm in a corn on corn with a very high susceptible hybrid to tar spot, and you're in a tar spot prone area, right now is the management or applying a fungicide does not pay in South Dakota to do that. Southern rust, again, this was the one disease that we saw a lot. We did see some yield loss to this disease this past year. Pretty much every field we went into had some level of southern rust and starting to track, right? In 2023, we just kind of tracked and kept that. We saw a lot of fields in Bonham County. Didn't see a lot after that, but 2023 was bottom. It was in peak, and then also found it again in 2024. All of the green counties, so pretty much all the same that had tar spots, so like the 46 different counties also had some level of southern rust out there. When we look at 2025, again, saw a lot of the same counties that had southern rust previously, had it again. Again, our sampling and ability to do that kind of changed a little bit, but we did see quite a bit of southern rust out there. A lot of fungicide went on for southern rust. Timing was an issue as to when application was made, but again, southern rust typically appears to be appearing late in the growing season most years, so typically we've not needed a fungicide. But last year, in 2025, that was not the case for quite a few counties and fields, right? We really did need that fungicide. So if we see another year of southern rust like we had this past year, especially for finding it early in July, because typically this is one that we found closer to black layer, a fungicide might be warranted. So again, knowing that growth stage, knowing that BT to R3 is optimal time to control southern rust, much like it is tar spot. Really encourage you to scout and monitor for the disease out there. Again, same type of look with the crop protection network. Again, the mapping tools, we are able to locate in real time and put up counties that flag for having disease. So whether we go and we see it ourselves or samples are submitted or whatnot, it's anonymous. Like, it doesn't say which fields have it. It just says that the county now has it. Gives you just a quick little look. And again, we have the different tools that between the Midwest and the North Central states put together and work together on recommendations for best control out there. So a lot of times, we get different pictures or leaves and whatnot dropped off, Dr. Shires and I, with a lot of different things going on, right? In this one, we have some southern rust, we have some tar spot, we have some city mold, we have a lot of different things. We have to kind of bridge the gap to determine, what is happening out there, so we can identify what's there. But whether or not we need a fungicide, we need to know what growth stage you're at. So those are follow-up questions that we typically will ask, and just kind of keeping that in mind. With that, we have some different, like I said, the tools on that crop protection network, and we have some different fungicides that we work with some unified trials. And so with the efficacy trial here, each of these products are labeled for the different diseases, and they get like an excellent, so like it's denoted with an E for excellent, G for good, BG for very good, NL is not listed, meaning it's not labeled for that disease at this point in time. If it's a U or a UL, like it's unlisted, or we don't have enough data to support saying, yes, this product works or doesn't work against the disease. But this is going across many different states, many different trials, and we get together and we walk through each of the different products there. So again, that is found on the Crop Protection Network. So really encourage you to take a look at some of those tools if you do need to apply a fungicide for southern rust, or if the time would come for tar spot, or any of our other diseases like gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight. We do have some of them. Lucky for us that's not something we always have to apply a fungicide for. Briefly, just want to make mention of soybean cyst nematode in South Dakota. We have done some more sampling, and we're starting to see it west of the river, right, in areas that don't typically or maybe not have a lot of soybean. But you have to remember, SCN does feed on different cover crops and other hosts out there. So we're starting to see that the movement, it originally started in 1995 in Union County, so it's come a long way since then, because we added Jones and Lyman and Todd here in 2025. So again, quite drastic as we look across the state. With the sampling that the grad students and the extension plant pathologist group has done, did a major HG typing as to see which HG types were being detected in South Dakota. There's two major HG types detected. It was the 1.2 and the 2 out there. So just a brief, SCN is one of the most devastating soybean disease, pest, pathogen, whatever you want to call it, on soybean, because it's unsegmented roundworm attacks underground. It's really bad when you start to see the symptoms above ground, so the stunted plants, the yellowing roller coaster effect. Typically a field that looks fine, meaning it looks green, it looks great, could have 30% yield loss. When you start to have those traditional symptoms, you're having over 70% yield loss. So again, quite huge things happening there. There is resistance developing on PIKH 788. So again, really want you to take a look at what different genetic resistance is available to you. Really want to encourage you to rotate that. You may need to look at an eviticide if numbers are quite high, or look at changing some of the rotations of what you do, and really keeping in mind of alternate hosts. So like henbit and field pennycress, some of the weeds, as you control weeds in and around the field, because it is a host for SCN. Encourage you to sample for SCN to get a true account of what is out in your field. SCN Plant Diagnostic Clinic offers that testing. For stripe rust, again, this is the one disease where we say if you're seeing it early, you're a wheat grower, you would want to look at budgeting in and applying a fungicide to control that. So it's just kind of like its name says, stripe rust. You'll see those lesions in a stripe. They're kind of a yellow-orange color. So it can be quite yield limiting there. So real briefly, just want to end with when is it profitable to apply a fungicide? Generally recommend if you're on the same crop, no rotation. So if you're on a corn on corn or wheat on wheat, soybean on soybean type, with not rotating. If you have minimum tillage, a fungicide might be applied just because of all of the residues that are up there. If you have a disease susceptible hybrid, a field that's had a history of plant diseases, and you've had that prolonged wet weather. Some things to minimize resistance would be, encourage growers to leave a strip, really see if your fungicide worked or didn't work, see if you got disease. Basically trying to check to see if you needed it. Really looking at not only rotating different products, but not relying on one. So really look at that FRAC code, follow the label, and just really use good agronomic practices. I want to just end with a question that I get every year, mainly because we have a lot of wind, right? We get some rain, we get some hail, a lot of hail. Questions on hail. Do you need to apply a fungicide after a hail event? Well, a hail does what to the plant? It causes a wound, right? So it causes a tear or a bruise, bumps it down. So it wounds the plant. The diseases that need a wound to get into the plant are bacterial. Bacterial diseases are not controlled with a fungicide. Now, if you had a fungal disease before the hail, you still may need a fungicide for that fungal disease. But the diseases we see after a hail event are bacterial in nature. So fungicide does not protect against any yield loss with that. So again, looking at my screen, diseases that need a wound are bacterial. Gauss's willows, bacterial blight, common spot, soft rot, bacterial leaf streak. Soybean diseases would be bacterial blight, bacterial pustule. Again, we don't use a fungicide to control bacterial diseases. These are our fungal diseases that you could use a fungicide for. I don't have tar spot listed on here just because we've not had to spray it here in the state, but it could be on there, right? So fungal diseases do not need a wound. These are the diseases that influence our yield response to a fungicide, more so than our hail damage. So again, disease management starts with you. Really know your field history, know your hybrid package, keep track of the weather, so get good records. Really looking at rotating modes of action, and then really scouting to make sure that your treatment worked or didn't work. Diagnostic clinic is available for samples. Proper diagnosis leads you to better outcome on whether something would work. Just want to kind of end with some of our disclaimers here with SDSU. And this is Dr. Shires' contact information. She is our plant pathologist located up at SDSU in Brookings. And then this will be my contact information. From that, I'll turn it over to you, Stephen.
All right. Thank you, Connie.
Yes.
I have put some contact info into the chat. I did not get Madeline's. There's Madeline Shire's webpage. Yeah, this guy. All right. Thank you, Connie. Anybody got any disease questions for Connie? All you folks in Sioux Falls are on blast right now. I can see you very closely. Look at this guy. What do you guys think? Which one's right? Hello. One of these hands is correct. That's yep. So I have these mannequins in my office to display what they're supposed to be doing. He just fell over into the corner. He's a good demonstration because he's a dummy and I can make him do anything I want. And I just want you to know, we talked about gloves. Choosing the right glove is kind of step one, right? Wearing the glove appropriately is step number 2 or 3. Checking the glove is probably step 2, but wearing it appropriately, correctly is really important. You're not going to get much protection if you wear it wrong. If you turn it inside out or you wear it on your face, the glove's not going to do anything for your hands. Got to put it on your hands, right? That seems simple enough. When you wear it and you wear a Tyvek suit with it, please wear a Tyvek suit with it. Your hands aren't the only things that are going to be exposed. Don't wear it like this. See how this guy's got the sleeve tucked into his glove? Imagine any pesticide that gets here, where's it going to go? My finger just did it. Went straight in the glove. And it's going to sit down here, and this is, mostly waterproof. So the water's just going to sit, that pesticide's just going to sit here and expose your hands the whole time. It's important to recognize where exposures happen. When you're handling pesticides with your hands during mixing, your hands are going to be one of the most exposed places. That's true across the board. You handle a wand, if you use a handheld sprayer. When you climb into and out of vehicles, chances are you've used your hands, you've touched things. They're probably contaminated, either the things where your hands were. Don't expose yourself unnecessarily. My general rule is never let the stuff touch your skin. You can achieve that. It's extremely difficult, but if you work towards it, you're doing pretty good. This is the appropriate way to wear a glove. See how he's got it on the outside of the glove. Again, anything that gets on the outside is going to drip down. Now you might be thinking, and this is an appropriate thought, what if you hold your hands up like this? Hopefully you're not walking around like Will Ferrell, unsure what to do with his hands in Talladega Nights. But if you do, it'll drip down. If you're wearing it like that, it'll drip down into your elbow. We don't want that either. So one of the ways you can get around it is, one, pay attention to how often you're doing this and try not to do it as much. Or 2, you can actually tape around. That's going to an extreme measure to tape. But I do expect you guys to wear these, especially if the label tells you to. You have to wear it. 2, it's just good protection. There's a lot of chemicals out there, like I said, proprietary information. We don't know what's in these pesticides in some cases because they don't have to tell us. It's important to recognize that should be enough just to put this stuff on because they don't have to tell you. And I'm telling you, a lot of those things are cancerous. 2, even the pesticide chemicals themselves. We don't have 50 years worth of data to tell you 50 years of constant summer exposure. What is that going to do to you? Well, we don't know. We have no clue. So my general advice is protect yourself. Be ugly, be hideous. You're not trying to press anybody when you're out making applications. Protect your skin. Wear that mask. Look dumb. Wear those goggles. Protect your eyeballs. When you're mixing, when you're pouring things into your tank, wear an apron. Protect your chest. I can tell you that most absorption happens in the genitals or in the groin area. If you don't wear anything and it drips down and then you crunch yourself into a cab of a trailer, all that pesticide's being concentrated where those folds are, like where your belly meets your legs, and it's just pressing that pesticide into your skin. Don't let this happen. Wear stuff to protect yourself. In some cases, like this, it's a single use. Wear it, throw it away. If you do wear things that you can rewear, wash it separately. Use high volumes of water. Use a high amount of dish soap or of clothing soap. Don't put dish soap. You can in your clothes. Probably not a good idea. Use a high amount of detergent. If you got these options, take advantage of them. Use them. You don't want to expose anybody else. You don't want to expose your children. You don't want to expose yourself unnecessarily. To the anonymous attendee, Connie, you've got a question. If you want to type that answer out, I've talked too much. We don't have time for you to answer live, but please pop onto that question and answer anonymous for me. Okay, next up, we have Dr. Eric Jones. He's an assistant professor with SDSU, and he's also our weed management specialist with SDSU Extension. As usual, I'm gonna pop on his contact information onto the chat. He covers weed management and row crops, and his knowledge is exceptional. Again, I say it every time, right? Because their knowledge, there really is exceptional. And Eric's easy to talk to. He's one of the most easy person to talk to up here. He just joked with me and got me pretty hard, claiming that he was our supervisor. And yeah, I told him I'm not going to worry about him ever again. Okay, Eric, are you on? You ready to go?
I am on, and I appreciate that introduction. Let me get this pulled up. I only have one screen, so it should be easy to manipulate today. We looking good?
We're looking good. Oh, yeah, we're good. That's it.
All right.
All right, man.
All right. Well, thanks for that introduction. Today we'll be going over just kind of navigating weed management. I don't want to get too deep into data or anything like that because honestly, in 2026, there's going to be a lot of changes just based on some new labeling and just some new weed problems. Now, one of the first new weed problem, or not really weed problems, but something that's been glaring for the past several growing seasons, and that is the dicamba that's registered for over-the-top applications in soybean. Now, last year we had a last-minute emergency registration, but this year, as far as we know, now things can change from now till tomorrow, but right now there is no dicamba product that is labeled for over-the-top applications in soybean. So post-emergence, right? The old labels of Extend, Tavium, and Genia, they're not registered. That being said, I think most of you probably know this. What law are going to be probably half the soybean varieties that are going to be planted out there? Extend Flex. I really want to caution you all not to try to cowboy it. You know, it's a good herbicide. It kills a lot of our broadleaf weeds, but are you really doing yourself justice to be going out and spraying Clarity, Vanville, Sterling Blue, any of those other generic dicambas? I'm going to argue no. We've seen it these past few years. This summer, we almost lost atrazine, glyphosate. There's a lot of scrutiny that's getting put on herbicides. So if we start to misuse the tools we have and the technologies we have, I don't think it's going to be good. So just wanted to kind of put that out there that there's no over-the-top dicamba projects registered in soybean. Don't be doing any off-labeled applications. We do have other herbicides. Although there's not going to be any applications for over-the-top in soybean, we can still use dicamba. Now, the Extendamax, the Ingenia, the Taviums, those are not registered, but we can still use dicamba in corn, sorghum, wheat, pasture and range. We can still use it in soybean, but not over the top. It will have a lot of utility for pre-plant burn downs. There's a little bit of residual activity with dicamba. You know, some of these drier areas like central South Dakota where we're not getting as much rain, dicamba is great as a pre-emergence, but we need to realize that you still have to follow the labeled directions on this. So if you're applying 8 fluid ounces or half pint or less, you got to have a 14-day interval and at least 1 inch of rain before you plant your soybean. Greater than that, we got to wait 28 days, a month, let's just say. So again, we can use the dicamba, and if it's going to be effective and have a utility in our soybean production, we can still use it. But even if we're planting Extend Flex, follow the labels on those registered products. Now, something that we think about with the dicamba, right? Why is Extend Flex so popular around South Dakota? Dicamba and kochia, right? You plant Enlist soybean. Enlist does nothing on the kochia. But that's the question that we're getting, right? Well, we don't have dicamba for our soybean. What can we do? Now, just on this screen, I have a few little insets to show you again, like I mentioned at the beginning, we do have options. We don't need to do anything illegal or off label. So if you look at the screen from the left to the right, it's our non-treated. So there's a pretty healthy kochia stand there. Now moving from the left to the right, we have Cobra, our burner herbicide that's, old technology. Then we have Liberty. So if we look at those two herbicides, so the Cobra is applied at 12 fluid ounces, Liberty's applied at 32 fluid ounces. With that dense of a kochia stand, it wasn't great. But we start mixing them together, and that's where we start to see where these products are shining, right? When we use them in conjunction, we use them together, and we just get that much more horsepower out of these herbicides. And I'm using Cobra and Liberty just as an example because it's a stark difference. But if you're growing wheat, Maestro and Starring, right? Works great. There's a whole slew of other products we can use, atrazine, Callista. There's options for us, but I think we really need to use mixtures going forward this year so we can start effectively managing weeds, because if we start relying on one herbicide, it's not going to be good for us because we're going to have a lot of weeds, potential yield loss, and those surviving weeds are going to go to seed. And all we got to do is we got to keep doing this over and over again. So I say multiple herbicide groups, and kind of just have an illustration with this. Let's pretend that we have two herbicides, A and C. So when we mix these herbicides, hopefully we get more horsepower out of them. So for example, if you follow this little logic flow chart, we start with the jug with A on it. We apply that alone. Let's say we get 80% control. We followed up 80% control. It's not bad. We probably wouldn't have a yield loss in that crop. But you can see on that inner row, there's still weeds. Those weeds survive, they produce seed. We got a problem for next year, right? We're going to have to spray again and again and again if we don't get a good hold on it. Now, what about herbicide C? Maybe herbicide C isn't as great. Maybe we're only getting 65% control, right? Maybe we start seeing a yield loss there, some of that early season interference competition, late season competition. You look down that row, doesn't look so good. But then again, you mix them together, you get better control. So you're not seeing those later season escapes. We're getting more horsepower out of it, right? A lot of people say, well, what about a sequential application? Great, but what if you can't get in there a week later? What if it rains? What if your wind, too strong a wind? We're getting a lot better activity when we mix these herbicides together. So just kind of demonstrating this with something like leafy spurge, putting some data with it. So on the graph, on the vertical axis, we have 0 to 100%. So that's just control. Closer we get to 100, less weeds we have. So we have detail, which is sharpen, or saflufenicil, and plateau, which would be a mazapic. So two unique herbicides. When we apply them alone a year later on leafy spurge, we're not really getting greater than 60%. Again, we mix those two together, we're bumping it up to 85% control. Probably not the best, but leafy spurge, difficult to control, right? Just think about the mess you'd have if you're getting 65% or less compared to that 85. Again, mixtures, more horsepower. Now, when we also mix these two, we're getting broader spectrum of weed control. So if you think about the old Roundup days or glyphosate, you spray it, it kills everything. Well, glyphosate or Roundup still has a place, but a lot of herbicides today that we're spraying are either or. They're either good on a broadleaf or they're good on a grass weed. So when we spray the two herbicides mixed together, maybe herbicide A only controls species B and C. So if we were to spray that, we'd have a lot of species A left, right? So that's when we come in and we add the herbicide C. So then that herbicide picks up managing species A and B. So eventually what happens is we're managing all those weed species out in the field. We're not just leaving some off the table, right? Maybe we don't think so much about controlling foxtail or pigeon grass, but once you go out and see a soybean that's wrapped up in it, it's pretty bad, right? So we can alleviate that by mixing them together. Again, we get more horsepower and we're doing greater selection or greater spectrum of control when we mix them. Kind of putting a little bit of data back behind this, again, this graph set up similar. We want to get taller bars, right? Closer to 100. That means there's no weeds. So in this example, we got green foxtail, a grass, and velvet leaf, a large seeded broadleaf weed. We have 3 different pre's. We have Mahler or Metribuzin, which is mostly broadleaves. We have Dual Magnum, which is better on the grasses. And then we have Tendova, which is a mixture of 3 herbicides. So it's going to have the Mahler or Metribuzin or the S-metolachlor dual, and then a 3rd herbicide. So if we look at the 2 bars for Mahler or Metribuzin, we can immediately draw our attention, right? We get greater than 90% control, or that taller bar for the velvet leaf. But our bar is a lot shorter for that green foxtail. So we're going to have to play a lot of catch up later in that growing season to manage the foxtails. I should preface too that these are pre-emergence herbicides. Now, when we go to dual magnum, the scenario flips. So we have greater green foxtail control, and we really are losing control of our velvet leaf, less than 70%. But when we have that herbicide that has both these herbicides plus a 3rd, we're really reaching close to that 100% control. And that's what we're really looking for. Now, the last thing we think about with these herbicide mixtures is we talk about herbicide resistance a lot. So it's just one weed that's able to survive a lethal herbicide dose. And when we spray one herbicide over and over again, that one resistant weed is going to produce seeds. And as we keep spraying that herbicide, we're going to remove the susceptible weeds out, and all we're going to have are weeds left that are resistant. To pick on a herbicide, glyphosate Roundup, in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was really good, right? You could spray it. You may have a miss here or there, but things were getting good. Now what happens if you just spray glyphosate in your field? It's like fertilizer for water hemp or kosher, right? Can't really get away with it anymore. Again, multiple herbicide groups. So if you have weeds resistant to different herbicides, you have those 2 herbicides mixed together. So you're reducing that selection pressure on resistant weeds. Again, now it's kind of a 3-way. We increase the horsepower of our herbicides, increasing the spectrum of control, and now we're minimizing the selection on herbicide-resistant weeds. So it's a real win-win, right? Mix the herbicides. Hopefully we don't have any weeds. Our effectiveness is better, and we're minimizing herbicide resistance selection pressure. And with that being said, the herbicide programs are critical. So in your pre and your post, you need to have these multiple herbicide groups at each application to get these good, effective results. Now, before we even spray the herbicide, something else we need to talk about today is mitigation measures, or the herbicide strategy that's been implemented by the EPA. So it's now a part of the label, right? Label's law. We have to follow everything on that label. What the EPA herbicide strategy is really doing is trying to minimize spray drift, runoff, and erosion, the Endangered Species Act. So it's basically just trying to better steward the land so our herbicides have less of a negative effect, which in my opinion is actually a really good thing. Now, there is this strategy, but in order to even spray the herbicide now, you have to accumulate points. And there's a whole lot of things we can do to acquire these points. So on this presentation, we have the EPA.gov URL. I mean, you can go to any web search engine and type in EPA herbicide strategy, and it'll take you here. But how do you acquire these points? Well, and it's maybe a confusing thing, but I want to point this out right away. So if you are farming in South Dakota, you show up, you set foot in that ground, you automatically get 2 points because the pesticide runoff vulnerability is at a medium classification. So the likelihood of runoff is a medium chance. So you're getting 2 points just by farming. Now, the other big thing I would say in South Dakota is the conservation tillage. There's a lot of no-till in the state, again, for good reason. So if you just show up to farm, you do no-till, you got 5 points. Now, if you're still in an area where maybe you're doing a, light field cultivation or ridge till, strip till, you're getting 2 points. So Worst case scenario, you're getting 4 points. Again, it seems maybe new and daunting, but we're already doing a lot of the things we need to do to get these points. The big thing I would say for everyone is start taking records. And I believe if you start making records of all of the things you're doing to get points, that's a point in itself. So 6 to 5 points for basically just doing your job farming. Now, you look at this EPA website, it's like 15, 16 pages long. There's a lot of scrolling. One thing I want you all to take away from this today is this little cheat I use on the computer, because there's a lot of scrolling, there's a lot of words, and it's hard to find what you want. What I do is I do a force search rather than scrolling all over. You hit Control on your keyboard and F at the same time, and there's this little box that comes up, little word box. You type in whatever you want. Maybe it's tillage or something, right? You type tillage and it's going to show you every instance of tillage on that web page. You could do terraces, you could do grassways, you could do record keeping, anything you want. It'll take you right there, start showing you the points, how you need to do that with, whether you do buffer strips or cover crops, record keeping, talking to a technical expert, so on and so forth. This is the way I think you all should be going forward to help manage your points, because probably a lot of you in the room or, online too, you probably already have 6, 7 points easy. You just need to sit down and think about it. So moving forward, I don't think it's going to be a real challenge. And with that, the Control F thing, it's not just for the EPA herbicide strategy mitigation points. If you're looking around at herbicides and want to see, all right, well, I'm going to go on the internet, look at the labels, but you scroll all day long. They're daunting. I feel it. It's hard to navigate them. You can do it here. So let's type in something like rate. So we type in rate, shows us all the instances on our label. We can click through it. It'll take us to the rate we need and the name of that weed, the size of it, the number of leaves. So we can spray the right rate on the right size of the weed for effective control. So it's not just for the EPA strategy. I want you all to take that, because we're starting to become in a digital world. I'm not great with computers, but it's a really good strategy to help navigate some of this stuff. 2026 is kind of the start for this point system for the EPA herbicide strategy. Right now, to my knowledge, there's only 2 labels that have it. The first one is Enlist 1, and the second one's Liberty Ultra, because those are some of the newest herbicides to be re-registered. Now with Enlist 1, it's going to be 4 to 6 points you're going to need to spray it. Liberty Ultra is 3 points. That being said, they're going to base the number of points on what you need based on the herbicide chemical characteristics. So for example, Enlist 1 will move around in the soil, has more, I don't want to say more potential for drift, but more, obvious repercussions for drift. But just due to that, it can move around a lot greater. So you need more points, more of these strategies to minimize the effect of that, compared with something like Liberty Ultra. We spray Liberty Ultra, binds tightly to the soil colloids. It's not coming off, right? So it's going to be going forward based off of the soil or the chemical characteristics of that herbicide. And some of them are going to be a lot more easy to manage, right? So this is the Enlist 1 label, pulled it off, again, using my Control F for the mitigation. And it really lays out what you need to do to get the points for applying the herbicide. So for our soils here in South Dakota, we need 6 credits or 6 points. Well, we can reduce the number of applications. If we have 1 application, we get 4 points. Remember, if we farm in South Dakota, we already have 6. But maybe we're doing two applications, right? Okay, so we're at 4 now. But if we're doing no-till or conservation tillage, again, we're getting back to the point where we have these points. So it may be new and kind of confusing, but just know if you start recording what you're doing and the corresponding points, you're probably going to be good. While the Enlist 1 label is pretty easy to follow. Liberty Ultra, I'll be honest with you all, is quite terrible. Even with the control F function, it doesn't really lay out what you need for the mitigation points. It just takes you to that website. But again, control F, go back to this website, figure out your points that you're already doing with your practices. You're going to be good to go. The other question is who's going to be responsible for this? And it's going to be the applicator, right? You need to ensure there's adequate points before spraying. And, whether you're the landowner, the farmer, the tenant, so on and so forth, just have that conversation with the applicator. Obviously, if you're all in this training, it'll be you. But, if you're, doing some other stuff, but you just need to make sure enough points are had, and you need to have the conversations with the right people to ensure you have it, because who's ever driving that spray rig and there's not enough points or you're missing something, that's on yourself. Okay, so we talked about mixtures. We really want to go forward with mixtures, and now we know what we need to do to just spray herbicides here in South Dakota. But I want to talk about a problem that's going to threaten the future of no-till farming, right? Our 3-point practice, and that's going to be kochia. I mean, everyone deals with kochia, even if you're along the 29 corridor in water hemp country, there's still a lot of kochia. And why do I say it's threatening the future of no-till farming? Well, last year we confirmed sharpen or saflufenicil resistant kochia in central South Dakota and northeast South Dakota. We use these herbicides for pre-plant burn down, so we have a weed-free field, so we can plant our crop in there, and we're not having this early season interference. Roundup glyphosate used to work great. Dicamba worked all right, but again, we also had some restrictions from the time we needed to plant, things like that. And sharpen was it's good on kochia. We can almost plant immediately into it, and things are good. But again, we start using this one herbicide over and over again. We start selecting for resistance. Now, on this little screen shot, the far left, the big pots are going to be non-treated, and then the 4 pots to the right are treated. So the top is our susceptible. We spray it with an ounce of sharpen, about 3-4 inches tall. Killed it. Our resistant on the bottom, they look pretty healthy. Now you may be thinking that's just an ounce of sharpen, bump it up to 2 fluid ounces. That's fine. If no one's looking, we bump it up to 3 or 4. Well, some of these were actually surviving pretty great rates. So just an inset of different populations from across South Dakota. What I want you to pay attention to is that Spink County. That's where we found some resistant kochia. 100 fluid ounces wouldn't kill it. Darn near a gallon of sharpen wouldn't kill it. So we're not going to spray our way out of this problem with sharpen, at least. Dicamba, like I said, is an option for pre-plant burn down, but there were some of these populations from Hughes County, central South Dakota. It looked like it was surviving kochia. So, I mean, what do you do, right? You get rid of dicamba and sharpen. What do you have for a pre-plant burn down option? You're going to have to get out the old cultivator, get the chainsaw out and cut it out from the shelter belt. I mean, there are options though, right? I mean, there's gramoxone, but does anyone want to spray it? I mean, it works great, but there's the skull and crossbones on it. But like Steven said before, there's PPE we can use, right? We have the technology and equipment to keep ourselves safe, but there's the enclosed system, right? It's kind of a pain to load up. You need to wear that respirator. Again, these are all good things that keep us safe, but is that a hoop you want to jump through? I've wore a lot of respirators on 100-degree days. It's not fun, but we got to do what we want to do. But if you're not wanting to spray gramoxone, I mean, there's other things, right? Do we even want this kochia to come up, right? What about a fall burn down or a fall pre-application, right? I'll be honest, there's similar problems though. And we're relying just on a few herbicides that are similar to sharpen or saflufenicil, right? Fall Valor, I say that's the South Dakota herbicide. It gets put on a lot of acres. Spartan or sulfentrazone do too. I mean, again, they're good herbicides, but once we start relying on one herbicide, we're kind of asking for trouble. Now, something else that they found up in North Dakota was there was cross resistance. So if you had a sharpen resistant kochia, it was also going to be resistant to Valor Spartan. So, it's kind of shoots ourselves in the foot. And for example, that the kochia that came from Spink County, they didn't really spray a lot of sharpened pre-plant burn down. It was just a lot of fall Valor. So just kind of showing you some data, or not really data, but pictures behind this. This came from my colleague up in North Dakota. So just set up this little figure. We have our susceptible check 1 and susceptible check 2 on the far left. So these are the kochias that are susceptible to Valor. Now the 2 in the middle, Minot and Mohall, those are resistant. As we move to the right, we see this acronym UNT, that's non-treated control. So this is just the seeds in the pot. You let them germinate, this is what it looks like. Now the next 4 pots were treated with Valor at 3 fluid ounces per acre. Pretty stiff Valor rate. We see the susceptible check at the top. There's one kochia plant. It's not probably resistant. It blew through it, but for the most part, there's no kochia. We move down into Minot, Mohall. It looks no different than the non-treated, right? There's a lot of kochia that's emerging. We go back down to the other susceptible check again, not really anything there. So it's a real problem. 3 fluid ounces of Valor. We're not spraying our way out of it with just one herbicide. But they also provided some more information. So what about Zidua, 2.5 fluid ounces? Graphs are set up the same. So even with our susceptible check, Minot, Mohall, and then the other susceptible check, it's not great. Looks a whole heck of a lot better than Valor on the resistant populations, but it's not great. What about a mixture? What about that Valor flumioxazin and Zidua pyroxasulfone? What if we were to mix it together and say something like Fierce? How would that look? Kill all the susceptibles, kill the majority of the Minot and Mohall that were resistant to the Valor and Sharpen, right? So think about if we started doing that from the beginning, right? We used 2 herbicides. We used a mixture, right? We increased the horsepower of the herbicides and we minimized selecting for herbicide-resistant weeds. So mixtures really do have a place. I mean, I don't think that we need to put all our eggs in the basket for the herbicides, but we can do things to improve the effectiveness and the activity of them. Now, it's hard to say what the best mixture is though, but I'll let you all know that right now, we're doing a big study looking at what beats Valor, right? We're doing a whole bunch of different herbicides. So, a lot of these herbicides aren't going to be ironclad or super effective on kochia. So something like Prowl, even at 3 pints, when we apply it in the fall, it's probably not going to be great. But what happens when we mix it with something like metribuzin? Valor, again, it's great, but what if we put it with that Fierce? Or what if we do Fierce MTZ with metribuzin? So we're doing a whole slew of different treatments, and we don't need to get over into the specific treatments yet, because we actually just put these out in the fall of 2025, because I'm trying to get you all some answers. But the idea from it is, mixtures. And on the screen, there's probably a familiar face to some of you, Dwayne Beck out at Dakota Lakes, or Pier. Talking to him when I came is, we utilized a lot of fall applied herbicides, right? It's great for central South Dakota. We don't get the rain in the spring we need at plantings. We're going to use snow melt. So Dwayne said we utilized a lot of fall pre-herbicides at Dakota Lakes, and we always use mixtures. Always use mixtures. And I believed him too, because he's, before he retired, he was doing some crazy stuff out there. He's probably one of the main reasons why there's a lot of no-till here in South Dakota. But I think we need to go with mixtures, right? So if you don't believe me, maybe you believe Dwayne, right? The mixtures, we're going to increase our horsepower, increase the spectrum of control, and we're going to minimize that selection pressure on herbicide-resistant weeds. But I'd like to remind you all that herbicide programs are critical. And we need to do something out there pre-emergence. We don't want to let these weeds come up. Now, just in this example, again, this is just an example. It's not product endorsement. You can make the best judgment on the products you want, but something like Fierce, right? It's got the Valor and the Zidua in there. Looked really good in this soybean plot pre-emergence. And then we came back with the max labeled rate and a heavy rate of Enlist 1 and Liberty mixed together. It was really good season-long weed control, and it yielded about 60 bushel. So if anything, take away from that, I want you all to know that going forward with the herbicide strategies, you all have enough points to apply most of the herbicides here in South Dakota. I forgot to mention that the maximum required amount of points is 9 points, but the average is going to be about 4 to 6. Everything we do farming wise, production practice wise, we're going to get our points, but just take meticulous records, write things down, know what you're doing in each field, and you have those points. And mixtures. With that, I've seen maybe not a whole bunch, but a few comments popping up in the chat. So I will be happy to take some of those.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Eric. So if you guys have questions, you can raise your hand. You can ask the host. They'll relay that information. If not, if you're watching from home, feel free to just pop into the chat and throw in your question there. Interesting comment, Eric, from Steven Schutstead. Sounds like maybe rye as a cover crop offers some allelopathy for kochia.
And Stephen, I appreciate you bringing up that point. And it doesn't even have to be on the allelopathy, right? Rye is a winter annual. So we're planting that in the fall. And once it starts picking up in the spring, getting some warmth, some moisture, it's going to grow. So it's going to have that physical barrier too. That's going to minimize the emergence of that kochia and other weeds too. And so when you terminate that rye cover crop, it's going to just act like a carpet, a physical barrier. So it's not just kochia either. I mean, a lot of our summer annual weeds, even water hemp or lamb's quarters, some grasses too. I mean, kind of manipulating our crop rotation is going to be good. The other one we had was, what do we have for yellow toadflax? That is a really great question. So I call it yellow toadflax, the kochia of the pasture and rangeland. So what we've found is a heavy, great rate spot treatment of Tordon. So like Tordon at 2 quarts works well. The other thing I would say is use mixtures there as well. So we've seen Tordon and Telar mixed at relatively high rates together is better than just spraying either Telar alone or Tordon alone. We're doing some more research on yellow toadflax, looking at things like 2,4-D mixed with Tordon or other herbicides to manage yellow toadflax. But it's just a really hard one to kill. One last thing I will say is we've looked at a herbicide called Method, which the active ingredient is aminocyclopyrachlor. And that does great on yellow toadflax. My only hesitation with recommending that herbicide is you cannot graze, nor can you hay that for an extended period of time. And it also damages those forages quite well. So I'd say a Tordon Telar mixture at max labeled rates is probably going to be your best option for yellow toadflax.
You've got an amaranth question as well. A Palmer question, I should say. What's going on? What is going to work on water hemp or Palmer? The new herbicide is not currently available in SD. Not sure what herbicide they're talking about, but
yeah, I don't know what herbicide they are. I mean, I know there's a few of them. The problem would be, and we've looked at some of them, they're not going to be effective just by themselves. Water hemp, what we've seen Enlist Liberty works great. But I really like to see those pre-emergence herbicides. So something really strong up front, not letting them germinate. As that herbicide wears off, again, mixtures. Enlist Liberty is really popular around the state. But with that too, those two herbicides don't have any soil residual activity. So if you can do a post-emergence residual, like layering something with your dual or warrant, so you can minimize those later emerging weeds, that's going to be really important. Now, with that being said, there's going to be some herbicide resistance issues in the state, and we've initiated a statewide herbicide resistance screen on water hemp and kochia. So we will be able to give a better description and more local recommendations once we get the data from that, because a lot of herbicides are starting to fail. We're starting to see atrazine that's not looking great on water hemp, or Callisto, or some starring issues with kochia. So it's kind of a loaded question, but I'm still a big proponent of strong pre's up front, 2 or 3 unique herbicides, the similar with the post. Add that post residual in there as well. Thanks for that question.
Nice. Any other questions? Now's a good time. We still got about 7 minutes. You know how it's going to go. I'm definitely going to talk. Counties and regional centers, you can go ahead and pass out those affirmation forms for those folks that are at home. You will follow this link that I'm about to put up there, and you'll fill out that affirmation form. Make sure you fill it out in its entirety. Put your name, your applicator barcode ID number. We do need contact information just to make sure that everything's being done appropriately. Going to.
Stephen, are you going to talk about that if there's a new applicator that has not had a license before, a private applicator license, that we need a photo ID of their driver's license?
Yes. Get this out of the way. I wanted to show this to you guys. For those of you guys that are new applicators, when you came in, your host should have taken a picture of your driver's license. We absolutely have to have a picture of your driver's license. The front side's fine as long as it's got a picture, your birth date, and the driver's license expiration date. Has to be government issued, so driver's license works well. If you're from out of state, you can use an out of state license or a passport. If you're from a different country, you can use your passport, but we do need that picture. For those of you guys that are hosting, make sure you send that to SDDA agronomy, and I've got that email somewhere here. Here we are. So for you new folks, you'll send it here. Oh, thank you, Katie. Yes. Make sure, and you can either attach it. I think I've got a spot that you can attach it on the survey, the affirmation survey, or you can just send it directly to SDDA agronomy. Do not send it to me. I'll just forward it over. It's no good to send it to me. I wanted to show you guys this. This is Eric was talking about. There's only currently 2 herbicides. I think there's 4 herbicides that currently have the rating on there, but there's a total, I think, of 6 or 7 current chemicals. The way this rollout is going to work, as a product goes through re-registration or is introduced to the market for the first time, they'll go into their modeling, they'll go into this form and say, okay, it falls under these types of groups. It is this type of chemical. The likelihood that it is going to run off is this much. So we'll say they need this many points. The likelihood that it's going to drift, it'll need this sort of buffer distance. And I can tell you that dicamba is going to be one of those that has a ridiculous buffer distance unless they figured out a way to make it sit down. He also mentioned using paraquat dichloride. That is an available option to you, but it is important that you recognize in order to use that, you do need to have some additional training that is for free available through Syngenta. So I just wanted to post that back up here again, just so you guys are aware of it. And now we are ready. Now I don't have to take up your time anymore. For those folks that are watching from home, I'm going to do 2 things for you. You can click this, follow that link, and fill out that survey. Or you can take a picture of that QR code. If you guys aren't familiar about QR codes, you pull out your phone, you open the camera, you hold it up to it. When it comes up at the bottom and says, "Ooh, website," you click on the website, it'll take you there. The survey is active. You can have as many as 4 people watching on one device. There are spots for it. So if you've had 3 people watching along with you from home, no problem. We have a spot for you. Make sure you fill out in full for everybody that is attending and intending to get certified or recertified. Importantly, at the end of that survey, it is mostly about data collection. So we want to know you, who you are. So we're giving the credit to the right person. But importantly, I'm allowing you guys an opportunity, and this goes to folks in person too. At the end of the survey, it's going to give you the option of adding more stuff, evaluating your experience. This is really important to sort of direct how education goes, how these webinars go, how we educate you, what's important to you. How is this going to connect with you in a way that's going to change your behavior in a positive way, that you're going to be doing a lot of the things that we're suggesting, because they are not just, in some cases, recommendations. They are very important. And so we want this to mean something for you and have an effect on you. So please help direct the way this course goes. For those of you in person, we've got an in-person survey. If it's not available to you, I'll gladly share that with you. Your host should have printed it out and have it available to you. If not, again, I share it with you. Something else that you can do, I gave it to you before in the chat, but it's here. If you are interested and you need pest management guides, please, this is what you need to do. I will just put this one back up into the chat. Again, pest management guide request form, you follow that second one. For the affirmation survey, you'll follow this one, the one that's on the screen right now. Anybody have any questions about anything that you heard today? If you haven't been recognizing it, our ability to predict the weather has gone almost out. Like we basically have very limited ability to predict the weather. All of our models are based on this stable climate condition that no longer exists. We are experiencing such dramatic shifts in the way that our climate behaves that our models no longer predict the weather as accurately as we want to. So when we start looking out, 2 weeks, the amount of accuracy drops off precipitously. It's after about 3 days we have almost zero predictability. And so when we look out in the summer, it's really important to start planning. Is it going to be a hot year? Is it going to be a dry year? What sort of crops are you going to plant because of that? What sort of weed management are you going to respond with? What type of insects are going to be problematic? And so you do a lot of this planning beforehand. In the absence of climate data, in the absence of important, useful climate data, just try to keep yourselves variable. Keep yourselves able to respond to changing conditions. Have a plan. So I think it's probably just in general, just trends, probably a good idea to think, okay, hot and dry, what are we going to deal? What are we going to deal with? How are we going to plan for that? A lot of that planning stage is going to be really important when you guys have to. And I don't mean when you consider implementing, when you have no choice but to implement these ESA mitigation strategies, that planning is going to be critical. Not only does it earn you points, but it's going to make you very good at addressing all the problems that might come up. Katie has put the survey up again. That's the one. Again, we will visit and fill out your information. That's how you will get credit. To explain the process, you'll get an email. It explains it during the survey if you read through it, but you'll get an email after you're done confirming that we've received it. That is your indication that, hey, not only did you go through the course, but you filled out the affirmation survey. The next step for you folks at home, I'll take attendance data and I get the times that you logged on and you logged off. So every time that it booted you off, I know when it happened and I know when you got back on. So if you've missed anything over 15 minutes, we start to question whether or not we should give that to you. So make sure you're logged on the whole time, fill out that affirmation survey. I'll go in and check attendance, make sure that everybody's up to scuff. I'll create a report, send that off to the Department of Ag. They'll update your licenses. For you folks that are in person, you'll fill out those pieces of paper. Those get sent to us. We create a report. We add it to the online attendees. We throw it at Department of Ag. They update your license. So make sure, it's really important, we have the correct data. When you write it down, make sure you write legible. If we cannot read it, it's a good chance that you're not going to get credit for it because we don't know who you are because we can't read your terrible handwriting. So write slowly, write legibly, make sure that we can read it. I'm still sharing this. You notice I got rid of my helper. You guys are going to see more of those mannequins. That one was named, gosh, what we named him Quinn? That was Quinn. For you folks that are in person, those hosts, make sure that you scan those affirmation forms. Make sure they're filled out completely. Scan them to us and send them over to us. Jerry, if you are a new applicator, then you won't put anything. You'll type in new. If you are an existing applicator, you can actually identify. This is important. I apologize for not putting this up. If you're not sure what your barcode ID number is, you can search yourself on this Department of Ag and Natural Resources database. I suggest you use only your last name. If you use anything more, there's a strong chance that you'll put in something wrong and it won't come back with any results. So if you need your license or your ID barcode, you can follow that private applicator search through the Department of Ag and Natural Resources. Something I wanted to point out, actual several things that I want to point out. Eric talked about weeds. Resources are our bread and butter. These are weed resources available to all of you. For noxious weed control, we've got a little book, we've got a big book. We've got noxious weed identification, we've got a little book, we've got a big book. Locally noxious weeds, that's a PDF through the Department of Ag. Weed control, pasture and range, we've got a big book. 2024 weed control guide, we got a big book. So hop on there. Those are the digital versions. If you want them in physical copies, I think I have most of these listed on that pest management guide request form. Harvey, it is not. We do keep a recording, but we privately put it on our YouTube channel. I can request. I'm not guaranteed that I'll find anything, but I can put in a request to try to get that. Harvey, if you see where it says to, if you click on to Stephen, to Stephen Robertson, or don't do that. I changed my mind. Shoot me an email. Shoot me an email and tell me what it's for. I'll forget that we chatted on this webinar. So hop on that email, shoot me an email, request that book, request that webinar, and I'll do what I can to try to get that recording to you. All right. Anyone having issues? Oh, go ahead.
Just want to remind people, if they're done filling out the affirmation form, they can hop off so we can help those that are remaining, if that would work out.
Please do. All right. Hey, Will, Antonides, I'm not sure if I said that right. I apologize if I butchered your last name. I'm going to allow you to talk. You can unmute yourself, ask your question. I see you got your hand raised.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
What was your question?
Oh, we've got your hand raised. Did you have a question for us, or?
Mine says, oh,
That's okay.
I'm sorry,
I
must
got
have
you.
I must have bumped that. I was trying to figure out, I'm not getting this, I wasn't getting to this survey, and I don't have my number available. I did finally got to that survey, but like Mike doesn't have his.
Did you try? Are you online, right? I mean, you have to be, but
yeah,
do you have access? Okay, go to the website I just put into the chat.
Katie's looking it up here on our database. So hold on, William.
Katie's gonna find y'all's numbers.
Antone.
Yeah, let's see.
E-N-T-O-N.
You threw so much stuff up there that I'm not seeing which one.
Yeah. Down at the very bottom, scroll to the very bottom. That's there you go. Hey, William, down at the very bottom, Katie has just sent you your number. Who else is watching with you that we need the number for?
Mike 8. Except he just walked out the door. This will not let you cut and paste.
Um,
Okay, 907 8530.
all right, I think we got you. Well, so I'm gonna ask you to mute.
Okay, ask me. Well, also, my wife will need her number, Lila.
Okay. Same last name?
Yeah,
Perfect.
then you can mute me.
I don't know that I can myself. You'll have to do. All right, Harold, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Paul, did you find the I put it in there. I'm put it in there one more time for you. This is how you search for your name. Search your last name, follow that, Paul, follow that. Search your last name. It'll pull up your barcode ID number. Confirmation. So, Eric, you asked how long it takes to get the confirmation email. It really depends. I can say that emails can take upwards of 20 to 30 minutes. So don't sit here and wait for that confirmation email to come through. If you got it and you got the message at the end, there's also a message. It just says, "Hey, we received your input." You can go ahead and back out. We'll figure it out from there. I've got you on here chatting. I've got you putting your name into the chat. So it's a matter of just going through and verifying things. So we should be able to do that. If I need more info, I'll reach out to you. But don't worry about waiting for confirmation.
I'm having trouble getting to where I can fill out the application.
All right, let me so I don't show that on the board right now, but here I'm putting a link now. That's the link to the survey. And I'm going to share this again. So remember, you can follow that QR code. Just hold your camera up to it. It'll pop up underneath it with a website address. Click the website address and it'll take you to the survey.
Yeah, because when I clicked on that link, it just took me to a page that said must be filled, thank you, and must be filled out by 5:30.
Interesting. Okay, let me see what. So I'm gonna click on this link here, and then I'll stop share. This is what you should see. Bingo. This is what you should see over here. First thing is thank you for attending.
Yep, I see that part.
Okay, and then you click the yellow arrow, and this is where you add information. This is for attendee number 1, attendee number 2, attendee number 3, 4. For you guys that are watching, this is another place that you can find your barcode ID number. It'll be certificate number. It's also located under the barcode on your license. For private applicators, it is a 7-digit number. Most commonly starts with 9. I don't think I've seen anything not start with 9. It should start with a 9.
All private applicator numbers start with a 9.
Bingo. And if you're a commercial applicator and you're here renewing the endorsement for private applicators, I think you should have both. I think they are assigned both numbers. Is that right, Valerie?
Yes.
Okay.
So they'll probably get a card, but it should show up on their commercial license as a private certification as well.
Okay. All right. Yes, Jason, as soon as you guys are done with the survey, if you're done, please log off. That helps us recognize that you don't need any help anymore. You're good to go. Hey, Hey Lee, don't worry about canceling. If it's a matter of space, then we'll look into it. But at this time, I think all three of those and Mitchell. Mitchell, if you're still on, maybe you can check out Lee. In fact, Mitchell, if you're still on, if you want to go ahead and drop Lee from the meetings, you're welcome to. Thanks, Joel. For those guys that are finishing up, stay warm out there. It is. It looks cold and windy. It never blizzard, but blizzard did. What's the past tense? Never came down with such snow and wind as to make me think it was a blizzard. There's time yet. I'm still alive. I've been through just about every possible storm you can think of. Hail, tornado, hurricane. I've seen decent. I've never been through a blizzard. I've been here since 2021. And while sure, maybe some of them, I've heard that there are whiteout conditions.
For you, Stephen.
Do what?
It's coming for you.
It's coming for me. I hope. Yeah, the irony is like I'm so desperate, like I really want it, and it's gonna kill me. It'll be the last time I'm ever heard of or seen again. All right, Todd, let's see. When I bring the barcode, it tells me it cannot be displayed. So try this.
Todd, your barcode is 9040508.
Yep. Do some people say it can't be displayed?
It shouldn't.
I've never heard of that before. I'm gonna check that out real quick. I don't
I
even
think what happens is that if, you put in Will instead of Bill, for a first name, it's not going to show up. I mean, it has to be exactly what we have in the database, which is why you should just use your most unique name.
Or there's a typo or something.
Yeah, there's probably a typo if it's not showing up in the search.
Yeah, it pops up. It pops up fine. If you were talking about the scanning that barcode or the QR code to get to it, that link that I've just put into the chat at the very bottom, Todd, that'll get you there. All right, just as a reminder, as you guys go through, as you complete, go ahead and drop off. Craig, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and unmute for me and ask away. Greg, if you're there, you've got the ability to stop to speak. Don't hesitate. We're here. We're listening.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not getting to that link to sign off here.
To fill out that survey.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see can you see the chat, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see that link that I put up there?
Yeah. Something's blocking it here.
Stephen, we're looking at your email.
I'm gonna put it. You're seeing my email?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. My fault. Okay. So, Greg, I just put into the chat that link again. If you'll do me a favor and hit the control button, that CTRL, and hold it while you left click on that. It should take you there.
And Katie just also put in the email to send a picture or scan of a photo ID if an applicator is new to the database as well.
Yep, again, don't send those to me. I just forward them. It's important that it gets there. I guess you could use me, but it's not the direct route you're hoping for. You know what? Dang, I just left click on it and it just took me straight there. You know, Craig, you may not even need to hit control. You
What?
can, but I think
What?
you could just left click that chat or that link there in the chat.
Oh, in the chat.
Yeah, did you find it?
I don't see it, no.
Craig, what's your email?
CD Myron at hotmail.com.
All right. I just sent you an email if you have access to it. Pull that up and you can just follow that link.
Okay.
For those hosts that are sending me affirmation forms, please send those to May. I will forward them, but they need to go to May Moore.
Hoffman is not getting the page for the survey.
Yep. Let's see, Todd. Okay, so Todd, if you click on that link, it'll get you there. Just left click on the link in the chat, just below your message where it says we still cannot get on that page. Click the blue letters with your left click on the mouse.
Hopefully, Todd, you have clicked on the chat button at the bottom of the screen to open the webinar chat and then go all the way to the bottom. And the survey.
In order to put the chat in there, you had to click on the chat button. All right, stop share. Where are we at, Todd? Are you getting there? Greg, did you find things?
Yeah, I got it on my phone.
Awesome.
But
That works. That'll do it. It's not as
I got
ideal,
it.
but
I got it. Thank you. Have a good day.
thanks, you too.
do I have to hit that red square to get my number in there? On there?
No. So you'll want to go down where it says certification number. That's where you want to put in your barcode ID.
Okay, thank you.
That red box is trying to show where you can find that information.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Jan, if you're still on, that is not my presentation. You are not still on, but not my presentation. All right, how are things going? We got any folks finding things?
We're down to 11 attendees.
Not too
If
bad.
you're still on there, once you get your survey done, you can log or leave this Zoom meeting. In the bottom right corner, you can click leave if you're done with the survey.
Sarah, if you're still on, it looks like you aren't the only one to have sound issues with Connie's presentation. I've gotten a comment about that. Val, Katie, how was sound coming in for Connie's presentation for you guys? I have a headset, so it's really difficult for me to recognize problems.
It was working. I mean, we heard Connie, so yeah.
It was a little echoey, but
Yeah, that's what I'm getting is that it was a bit echoey and sometimes at times hard to hear. She came in pretty clear with me, so I totally missed that. I should have told Connie probably to use a different mic. It's tough. It's tough when you host and you want to be in front of people while you talk. Using computer mics is not always the best. And I don't mind looking like a nerd wearing headphones.
I already have it pulled up.
Katie has Todd Hoffman's email pulled up to send the link to the survey. If it's your Yahoo email, Todd.
Perfect.
Katie just sent it to your email. So
Awesome.
hopefully it worked to click on that in there, Todd.
Perfect. Todd, let us know when you get access to it. I'll tell you what, I was thinking today was a bust. Everything happened so fast. I wasn't sure we were gonna get the blizzard condition. I mean, we had talked about some snow, and then out of nowhere, blizzard. Everybody needs to leave. I was like, oh, that's not good. But we made it through. I stuck around.
A good amount. The blizzard will hit on the day of commercial applicator training, just as a note. That is the day that it will hit.
Especially if I'm going to Brookings.
Yep.
I've
Mark your calendar. That's
so
the day it will be.
that'll be February 4th when you drive this way, Katie. Yeah, I'm just in my experience, I run into all the problems and I tend to be somebody that after experiencing the problems becomes the example to how to deal with the problems. First night, this dates me. I've said it before. I managed a Blockbuster. First night that I was in charge, the credit card system failed entirely, and so this is early 2000s. The idea of using one of those swipers sounds crazy because we had machines at the time, processors, but no, we were taking hand swipes, carbon copies of everybody's credit card, writing down information. It was a disaster. I was on the phone with IT for 2 hours resetting things, getting things going. Um, so I'm used to it. We'll get a blizzard. I'll drive through it and, yep, get myself in some serious trouble because I don't know when to say no.
Blockbuster, huh?
Yes, I used to work at Blockbuster. I really liked it. We were kind of a slow store, and you guys know I never take myself too seriously, even when I should. So we'd play baseball. And by baseball, I mean we'd take a ball of tape and then we'd take like a broomstick and hit it across the store while customers are in the store. We had a bouncy ball machine. We would take these bouncy balls and try to bounce them as high as we could in store. Sometimes they get stuck in the ceilings. A lot of the time, they got stuck in the ceiling. Bowling, music really loud.
Before surveillance cameras.
Mm-hmm. Mm, they had cameras. They saw me doing it. It was Blockbuster. They were declining anyway. David, are you able to left click where you just submitted, just underneath you, Katie put that survey.
His Gmail account. Katie is sending the link to his Gmail account.
Perfect. May's husband made some venison jerky, and I've been snacking on it all day.
You'll want to put that in your car for when you get stuck in the blizzard, and some water.
We had father-in-law's birthday this past Sunday, and the roads were a bit icy. So I joked with my wife. I grabbed like a whole bunch of food and blankets, threw it in the back of the car, and I was like, "This is for when we freeze to death together."
Yeah, that'll be a memory.
Yeah, it wouldn't last long because we both die together, but it would be a memory. Yeah, I am. That's been something that is, caution to me. Be careful when you're on the road. The idea of getting caught off the road into a drift and just your car disappearing, or truck even, because drifts can get to 20 feet tall. And then no one ever knows you're there. You're just stuck in that drift and the snow's all collapsed around you and no one ever knows you're there and you just stay there. I've heard those nightmare stories of people trapped in their car for days on end. Mm-mm.
Survey. Sounds like Todd was able to complete a survey, Katie says.
Perfect. Yeah, it
He
looks
got
like it.
email back, so good.
All right, we've got 6 attendees. Kurt, Dan, David, Don, Floyd, Steve. If you've got any problems, let us know. Raise your hand. Pop into the chat. Remember, you can access the chat down here. If you look down, should be like right over here. It'll look like a text box. If you just hover your mouse over the area, down at the bottom, it'll pop up. Choose the text box. Unfortunately, I can't share the screen to show you guys, but hop into that text box, access that. If we don't hear anything from you, I'm going to end this meeting here in 2 minutes at promptly at 5 o'clock.
Katie sent an email to David Vig with the link, so hopefully
Perfect.
That will work.
David, have you been able to access things? You can still hear us? Okay. Awesome. Thanks, David. All right.
All right. Yeah, David can log out or leave. Click on the leave button if you're, since we got the survey, or you got the survey.
Oh, good.
Down to 4, plus that includes David. We know he's done, so.
All right. Well, in the absence of seeing any information telling me otherwise, I'm going to assume that Dan, Don, and Floyd already completed their surveys, just did not log off. I'll give you the count of 10 to stop me and change them.
Save a piece of that jerky for Katie and me.
It's already all gone. I've already finished it. I can save you guys some. I actually have a decent bag, so I'll save one for you. I really
Yeah,
will.
I just want one. I just got to taste test it. Send it home
nice.
with Katie.
It's got a little bit of heat on the ends. The smoke flavor on it's really good. And it's that I like a really chewy, like almost hurts your jaw by the time you get done with it. But this has a nice chew to it too, so I will share.
Rip it off. It feels like you're doing something, accomplishing something.
It's when you tear it and like it gets all those white, like sinuous. It's just tissue connecting the muscle. But when you rip that off, that's a good jerky.
It feels good, yeah.
That's an
All right.
impossible to chew jerky. All right, guys. Thanks for coming. It was great to have you. And yeah, we'll see you later.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.